Chapter 24, Opera of the Phantom. There's a void outside of existence, which if entered into, englobes itself and becomes a womb. Such was Albion's couch. William Blake, Jerusalem. So in the blink of an eye, I was back in my wheelchair, at the very bottom of the spiral ramp running through the main building of Rosenberg Plaza, at least one floor underground. Rosenberg was behind me again. The digital ceiling light was on here. We were in front of a room marked with the number 27 and a placard that said recycling. Beneath this was the typical Triquetra recycling symbol, but with a pink happy face emoji in the center. The deliberate resemblance to the Trinacria was obvious. "What's this?" I asked. "What I call the kitchen. It's the room where we operate, the Hellbroth Gradalis. It's the heart of the plaza's alembic system, and the place where we make things into other things. Of course, it's connected to the universal system." He took Dennis' key set out of my hands and selected a key marked 27, which he then inserted into the door. He opened it, and we descended down a simple, straight cement ramp painted baby blue into a hallway. It was lit brightly. Not by the digital ceiling, but by regular white fluorescent tube lights, like you would find in any normal commercial property. The air was humid and hot. The smell of sulfuric acid reminded me of visiting the hot geysers at Yellowstone Park. We reached a bend in the ramp and took a right, then another, immediately, to go down a second cement ramp. It was open on the left side, except for an iron railing, and you could see a room below. The walls of the room were made of brick and painted white. A series of large metal containers wrapped around 3 of the room's 4 walls, the space against the 4th wall being taken up mostly by the ramp. Coming from no scientific background, several of these containers looked to me like large water heaters, or the big tanks I'd seen at breweries. They were all connected to each other, and to the walls and ceilings, with pipes. There was either smoke or steam coming out, some of them through other pipes, some of which were open, and some of which were connected to the other vessels. I realized that this was the source of the sulfuric acid smell. As we continued down the ramp, I thought I also recognized the odor of pork being boiled. But then I figured out that everything I was smelling was coming from assorted human body parts and fluids, being put through various processes of putrefaction, rendering, and distillation. I became certain of this when I saw, just to the left of where the ramp ended, the door to a large meat freezer. Through the window on the door, one could see the bodies and severed parts of people, mostly children, hanging from the ceiling on meat hooks. At the bottom of the ramp, on the wall to my right, there was a series of framed pages from medieval illuminated manuscripts. One showed a woman standing over an anvil with a baby laying on it, her anvil raised high, ready to strike. Around the anvil were scattered human body parts. Next to her was a flaming forge made out of brown bricks, with some of these body parts sticking halfway out of the fire, and a broom on the mantel for sweeping up ashes. It was obviously a symbolic portrayal of renewal, of life through death, being used here as a shorthand depiction of what was literally going on in that very room. The other framed pages showed a man hammering out a statue, seemingly, of a naked woman. A real naked woman lying on the ground being eviscerated with a knife by a man while another holds her down, in front of several men that look like priests or potentates of some sort. A small enclosed rose garden from which a river issued forth and forked off into 2 streams. An old bearded man lying on a bed, being castrated with a sickle by a younger bearded man, and a crowned woman falling onto a sword that pierced her chest, in a manner identical to the way in which Marcia Martina had died. I recognized the statue chiseling image as belonging to a bizarre medieval allegory called The Romance of the Rose, which I had never read or looked at much. I had learned about that one image only by reading about the influences for Jean Cocteau's 1930 film Blood of a Poet, in which an artist makes a statue of a woman that comes to life, just like in the Greek myth of Pygmalion and Galatea. I have since determined that all of the pictures on that wall were from the same book. These were the only things mounted on the walls, except for a few signs listing safety rules and procedures. It was only when I got past the wall hangings and turned around that I got a good view of all of the stuff in the room. The sizes and shapes of the metal tanks varied, as did the metals that they were constructed from. I am pretty sure that I can identify these metals. The largest one, placed against the wall to the left of the freezer door, was encased in a dull gray lead. The next largest, to the left of the previous one, against the wall opposite the ramp, was a tin cylinder almost as tall as the ceiling. To the left of this was a large, square iron forge, encased in red bricks that had been put together to look like a little castle. This then piped smoke into a large copper retort to the left of it, against the next wall, opposite the lead-covered tank. The retort was also connected on the other side, via another pipe that ran diagonally from the corner to two ball-shaped chambers, one silver and one gold. These were connected by clear glass tubes to the large green glass vessel that dominated the room, soon to be described in detail. In addition to these items, an emergency eyewash and shower station was situated in the corner between the lead and tin tanks, beneath the pipe that ran along the wall connecting the two. It was a yellow box with a window, slightly larger than a phone booth. Then between the tin and copper vessels, again beneath the connecting pipe on the wall, were 3 aluminum shelves, which were right in front of my face as I turned off the ramp into the room. These were mounted to the wall from waist height to shoulder height. There were dozens of small glass vases and bottles on these shelves, filled with various fluids. Some had pastes or powders within them. Beneath this was the door of a small refrigerator with one shelf. On the bottom, a human hand and forearm was visible. On the shelf were Tupperware-type boxes. One was labeled pee-pee-roni, and the other sliced pee-pee-roni. Milling about these appliances were a couple dozen people, performing a number of tasks with scientific equipment mounted on metal rolling trays, among which I identified a centrifuge for spinning test tubes and 2 electrolysis machines. I recognized many of the people from either the post-ritual gathering at the plaza the previous night, or from Rosenberg's speech at the Mithraeum opening the day before. At the center of the room was another dissection table, with dismembered human body parts on it, and, of all things, a sewing machine. Seated at this table, on a metal stool with a red leather seat, was none other than Consivia, wearing clean, white, clerical vestments, similar to what she had worn the night before, but without the cork hat. She was using the sewing machine to do something to the lumps of flesh in front of her. At first, I could only see her back and the sewing machine. I couldn't see the body parts clearly. "What's going on here?" I said. "Nature at her forge," said Rosenberg. "Seems artificial to me," I said. "Nature is an artificer," he replied. "And now we know her recipe." Whatever Consivia was doing, she was wrapping it up, literally in a black cloth, and handing it to a man in a white jacket by the time I got close enough to see the table in front of her. But by then, my focus had turned to object near the wall that was now furthest away from me, which appeared to be the main vessel within the whole system. It was made of clear glass, vase-shaped, with a long neck on top that reached to the ceiling, which sealed it on top, and a big bulbous bowl at the bottom. It was full of clear liquid up to the base of the neck. On the right and left sides, hookah-like tubes with nozzles on them were hanging down a couple of feet lower than the bottom of the vessel, which was itself about 4 feet off the ground. I knew that this was the gridales that Rosenberg had mentioned, a Latin word for a dish that was used to serve multi-coursed meals in medieval times, also called a satura, interestingly. Many etymologists thought that this word might be related to the genesis of the term grail, as in Holy Grail. The tubes reminded me of ancient Mesopotamian depictions of the Tree of Life, which depict gods collecting nectar from the tree through similar hoses. Another interesting aspect of the gridales was how it was being held upright. Instead of having a stand to rest on, it was balanced on the shoulders of what appeared to be 2 hoodwinked men who were chained to the floor. They each knelt on one bent knee in a half-genuflecting position, with the heavy apparatus perched on their shoulders kept aloft with their hands. Though their heads were entirely covered with black cloth sacks equipped with no eye holes, I recognized the expensive black business suits they were both wearing, without ties which were visible from the shoulders down. It was Paris and Chesterfield, the latter identifiable as the one with pale skin and a truncated middle finger. They were swaying a bit under the burden, but for the most part it was held remarkably still. The lack of tilt to the apparatus was indicated by a most unusual plumb bob dangling down to the middle of the vessel, inside the fluid, from a golden chain attached to the ceiling at the top of the vessel. Attached to this chain from its top with a black suction cup, and situated in the center of the vessel, in a strata of yellow liquid, was the diamond-like gem uncovered from the London stone by a bolt of lightning the night before. But now it had undergone a remarkable transformation. In addition to being greatly magnified in appearance, which I assumed was an optical illusion caused by the shape of the glass and the liquids inside, there were now eyes inside of within each of the kite-shaped facets on the crown, where there were eyes, blazing red with a green glint of intelligence. I could only fully see two from my perspective at first, but I saw the periphery of two others, and I knew there were 8 of those beveled facets on the crown, so I correctly surmised that this would be the total number of eyes now open on top of the diamond. 1 for each of the 7 planetary archons, I thought, plus 1 extra. Uranus? Mete? Whatever spirit or spirits these eyes belong to. The 2 in front of me were staring directly into my own eyes. This filled me with panic. I attempted to contact my informant for guidance. "What is this?" I asked mentally. "My replacement," came the reply. "This is where the rivers of paradise meet," said Rosenberg, as if I had asked him. "All of the waters of life flow here. It's where we transform them into a higher state and then make our deposits into the universal bank." Just then, Rosenberg reached into his coat pocket and put on a pair of tinted glasses. Then a small octagonal window opened up on the ceiling above us. It encompassed the Gradales and an area of several feet around it. You could now see all the way up to the lobby and the vortex above it. But after looking up once, I looked away, because the opening was bringing in what looked like blacklight from the moon, seemingly stronger, hotter than before. And I could feel that it was damaging to look at it directly. However, it was impossible to avoid the glare of it, reflecting off the glass vase and refracting through the diamond. I squinted. I could feel a headache coming on. Rosenberg tapped me on the shoulder. When I looked over, I saw that he was offering me a pair of the same type of tinted glasses. I took them and put them on. They stopped the pain right away. "So how is the moonlight coming through so intensely?" I asked Rosenberg. "Surely it can't penetrate the colored fluids in the vortex that easily." "Total internal reflection," he responded. "We actually use some of the streams of fluid that we've piped in to bend the light directly into here. We've not only got light from the sunroof coming in, but also from several other light portals arranged around the building. And in a few minutes, the UV light of the moon will be replaced by the green rays of hyperuranian." Total internal reflection, I thought to myself, the basis of modern fiber optics, a way of making light bend to follow a stream of liquid, and the long-treasured secret to the alchemical technique of starbathing. Starbathing, which I had written about in the past, was a means of channeling the light of the heavenly bodies into liquids, which alchemists claimed to be a key element necessary to effect certain chemical transformations. Mysterious illustrations for cryptic alchemy manuals often show the essences of the 7 classical planets, including a sun and a moon, being drained into a vessel which another sun and moon then bathe in. This is what Rosenberg had been referring to when he spoke of the bath of the stars, an alchemical term which I have theorized in the past might be related to Baphomet's name, if interpreted to mean baptism of wisdom. "So this is where you offer the fruits of your sacrifices," I said, "to your partners on the other side?" "Yes," he said, "and everything that's happened on the grounds of this plaza for the last 729 days has been part of a pact negotiated long ago. Much of the detail was worked out ahead of time regarding the victims and how their various essences would be processed, but there were elements left for me to figure out with the help of others and parts left to chance, as per the demands of the party of the second part." "And what exactly is being negotiated?" I asked. "Dining club privileges," he said. "Our ethereal partners are always welcome and encouraged to dine upon anything offered here whenever they like. Fresh essences can be absorbed directly from the body at the time of expulsion. We also keep the system here ever flowing with the sacred fluids which our partners like so much to suck. Specified amounts are piped directly to the upper and lower worlds at regular intervals, according to pre-existing agreements." "You mean piped to the planetary archons?" I asked. "They, among others," he replied. "And this is really just a demonstration of my ability to pay. I am proving that what I have claimed is true." I have the bodies and souls of every man, woman, and child of the human race at my disposal to negotiate with forever according to my will. That's the most powerful capital you can have in the higher worlds. You mean you think you own all the people on Earth and you can offer them as either slaves or food to another species living in another dimension? I asked, wondering if I really understood him. I wheeled myself closer to the Gradalis and followed Rosenberg encircling it counterclockwise. I then found that there was a third man helping to hold up the vessel. From the looks of his light brown leather cap-toe Oxford shoes, I knew it was Leopold. "Oh yes," Rosenberg replied. "I have all the gold I need now, and I hold a controlling interest in the debt of all the world's governments now, though their populations don't know it yet. People have already signed themselves away in toto to their governments in every country on Earth, so that makes me their de facto owner, and puts me in a position to use them as collateral, or to use them for whatever I want, really. I have all the power in this world now, and so I am going to use it to gain power in the higher worlds." "But what about now?" I said. "Now that the planetary archons themselves have been sacrificed, I have offered both them and the Earth people to the one most anxious to see them humiliated." He put his hands behind his back and resumed his strut around the Gradalis. "There is one further offering to be made, and that's the baby. He has been nurtured on the blood of the archons. Now he is to be born under the first light of Hyper-Uranian on this Easter morning." "Which baby?" I asked. "The child of Philippine, of course," he said. I knew that was the answer, but I still didn't understand how the conception and development of this baby was supposed to work. So I was questioning him to try to get him to reveal that information. "You mean she was pregnant when you guys raped her?" I said. "No, of course not," he said. "We raped her to get her pregnant and to humiliate her as Luna, the goddess bitch of birth and menstruation. But that goes without saying." "Then why did you all rape her in the behind?" I said. "And why would there be a baby born today when she died Friday night?" He laughed victoriously. "Pamela, you know better. You know the Eye of Horus does not obey the same rules of conception and gestation as the typical female womb. Extraordinary results require extraordinary efforts. So this baby is going to be magically born from the rectum of a dead girl today," I said. "And then you're going to sacrifice it?" "Yes," he replied. "As I am deflowering his rose garden and absorbing his celestial power through the opening of his fundament, I shall cause the expiration of he who has waited since the birth of time to be avenged. I will suck up his god power through my cock like a straw as it leaves his body." Rosenberg's penis became hard as he said this. He massaged it through his pants as he continued. "This will not only ruin his plans for a return to glory, but will pin him down into a new place of subjugation, while opening a secret door for me into the supernal Eden of the highest heaven. Then as he's dying, I will use his back as a stepping stone and climb up through the aperture to take my rightful place above." "So what do you want me for?" I asked. "You'll see," he said, coming back around the Gradalis to stand next to me on my left. "You'll see entirely too much. The sight of so much reality, cast into a new light, will shock you greatly. But I'll need you to maintain your constitution as you have so far, and tell me what you see when a new hole opens up in the sky and the rays of the sun from beyond are felt. You know what I mean. The light of the blazing star, from the portal between the pillars of the earth and the sky, beyond the moon and beyond the solar disk. This is the light that the Masons symbolized with their sacred G, just as scientists have named the gamma ray after it and used the Greek letter to represent the photon, the ultimate unit of light." "Don't you want to see it yourself?" I said. I was getting nervous, not wishing to be alone in whatever was about to happen to me. "No," said Rosenberg. He reached into his pocket again and switched to another pair of tinted glasses with pink lenses. "I have my reasons." He stopped pacing suddenly and stood still, facing the Gradalis. Next, he stomped his left foot on the floor and slid his right foot up against his left heel at a right angle. Then he pulled his red Phrygian cap out of his other pocket and put it on his head. Most of the men in white coats seemed to leave the room all at once. Concevia came over, wearing a pair of pink glasses as well. She whispered something to him, then turned around to walk up the ramp to the exit. But then she turned around again. leaned over me from behind and whispered in my ear also. I could feel her hot breath on my neck, and the odor was atrocious, like a restroom at a gas station. "You're on your own with him for this one," she said, patting my shoulder and causing involuntary spasms of revulsion. "He'll need you to tell him certain things about what to do and say next, based on what you see and hear." "Wait," I said, not wanting any such responsibility. "Where are you going? You're in charge of the rituals here." "I'll be directing another rite while you are working here," she said. "I have to do Easter Mass at St. Paul's." The lights went out. 2 assistants each switched on handheld white LED lanterns. These now provided the only illumination apart from the lights on some of the room's machines, and the black light coming through the moon channeled down to the Gradales. "What if I don't see anything?" I asked. "Oh, you'll see," Consivia said. "And you will look. You won't have a choice." Just as she walked away, I felt someone approach my wheelchair from behind. Then I felt the barrel of a handgun up against my right shoulder, just like I had experienced before. A large male hand grabbed my head from the top and jerked it backward so that I was looking up at the top of the Gradales near the ceiling. Another hand from outside my field of vision removed my glasses, causing great pain in my head. Then an eyedropper was used to put a drop of something caustic in the corner of each eye. I squinted and squirmed in my chair as it burned. "Keep your eyes open," the man said. It was Miles. He was wearing pink glasses just like Rosenberg. This is like a clockwork orange, I thought, but I have already seen so much ultraviolence, and so much ultraviolet light. What's a few hyper-Uranian rays? But I was just trying to give myself courage. Truly, I was afraid that the sky would literally open up, including all of the layers of the atmosphere that protect us from the deadly radiation of space. Already ultraviolet light was coming through, and now Rosenberg was speaking ominously of deadly gamma rays. Do these atmospheric layers somehow correspond to the realms of the planetary archons? I wondered. Is that why the light from beyond was thought by the ancients to be light from beyond Uranus, the lord of the sky? Then I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a recess in the floor directly beneath the Gradales. I had to back up my chair a little bit and bend sideways in my seat some to get a glimpse of what it was, and it was still hard to make out the detail. But because of the vision, or whatever it was, that I had been given just before coming to the kitchen in room 27, I now understood what horrors crouched beneath. It was a hole about 3 feet deep, plated with a metal that looked like copper and a bed of straw in the middle. In it sat the creature I had seen before, with Pindar's head, Philippine's womb, and my stolen feet, among others. But it seemed like it was even in a worse state than it was when it had appeared to me in the vision. Now it was convulsing and sweating profusely, while its one eye was rapidly fluttering uncontrollably. The womb that formed its back was even more swollen than before, and one lump was now greatly larger than the other. When it moved one of its legs, 2 scorpions, glowing bright green in the black light, scuttled out of the straw to the edge of the pit. The black light illuminated the occult sigils that had been drawn all over its head and body, which hadn't been visible in my previous encounter with / vision of it. A glass rod coming down from the bottom of the Gradalis, terminating just a few inches above the navel on the back of the creature, and was entwined with 2 clear plastic tubes that were inserted directly into the womb. I figured it was for the baby, presumably an IV drip feeding it the contents of the Gradales. And of course it resembled a caduceus. A crush of people were now filing into the room, all in their ceremonial black robes, but instead of the masks as before, they now only wore sunglasses on their faces, like Rosenberg. When they were all standing still, one of the young boys, no doubt a nymphus in the previous ceremonies, tooted some enunciatory notes on a trumpet. Then I heard everybody gasp. At that moment, I saw that the diamond was now levitating above the level of the fluids, and rotating. Its color turned from clear to red, and the faint purple glow of the black light changed to a bright pink hue. I noticed planetary symbols being projected in green on the sides of the vessel, and then refracting all over the room. They included the familiar signs of the 7 classical planets, plus another, the monad, a symbol discovered by John Dee, which combined the other 7. He representing this combination as an alchemical operation taking place inside of an egg. Now, the very thing that Dee had written about was taking place right before my overexposed eyes, as revealed by the pink light from beyond, or whatever color it really was, as scientists insist pink light doesn't really exist, but is rather a stand-in color our brains put in to represent certain invisible rays of the spectrum. With this brighter light, I could now see the scene in the hole below much better. But when I looked again, I wished that I hadn't. For what I saw was the creature's anus, Philippine's anus, opening up from within. As it did so, the rectum began to protrude externally, forming the pink floret that is referred to as a rosebud in extreme anal pornography, now even pinker. "Here we see the blossom of the holy rose garden of great Mother Nature," said Rosenberg. "And the rose gives honey to the bees," he sighed with carnivorous lust. I had been horrified a year earlier when I had learned that some people were turned on by seeing internal organs collapsing and falling out due to sexual abuse. Now my horror reached another level as I watched a tiny hand protruding from the opening, humanoid, but with sharp white claws for fingernails. Covered in blood and other slime, was my first witness of an anal birth. I hope it will ever be my last. It took less than a minute for the baby to rip itself out with ferocity, shredding the sphincter and utterly disemboweling the body of its mother as it did so. Even more astoundingly was the fact that the baby seemed to be getting larger as it emerged. First one entire arm came through, then the other arm and head came out together, ripping flesh along the way. Finally, the rest of the body fell down onto the straw below, like a piece of dung. All the while, Rosenberg chanted as the nymphy sang hymns in Latin, and the head of Pindar, attached to the monstrosity below, howled in pain. Already resembling a 15-month-old in stature and appearance, the precocious newborn immediately stood up and used its teeth, quite sharp, to sever its umbilicus, which appeared to me to be a short flesh tube connected to a much longer plastic one. This was strung through Philippine's womb and connected to the gratalice above. The child pulled it out through the entry hole in Philippine's pelvis. Then it put the tube to its lips and began sucking fluid out. As it drank, it grew to the size of a 3-year-old in just a couple of minutes. Apparently sated, the child climbed onto the back of the thing it had come from, the back being Philippine's stomach. That creature, despite being eviscerated rectally, willfully crawled over to the side of the enclosure where the child used its body as a step stool to try to climb out, but it could only reach up high enough to get its forearms out, and couldn't pull itself up. So the creature, whether motivated by maternal instinct or something else, raised itself up on its hind legs and leaned with its forelegs against the wall, which allowed the child to escape. I refer to the child as it, only to be gender neutral, as it quickly became clear that both sex organs were present. But there were other unique features as well, such as certain markings on the child's skin. These became more apparent after what happened next. The hermaphrodite toddler ran into the emergency shower, where it managed to jump up and pull the triangular yellow handle that was hanging down from the ceiling inside. A siren went off, the white light came on inside, and water began pouring down on the child. It used its hands to rub the muck off of itself. This revealed its skin, which was dark and covered with what looked like stars. In the UV light, these popped out brilliantly, so that its hide looked like the sky itself. As all this was happening, one of the robed celebrants, acting on a nod from Rosenberg, slammed the door shut. The child turned around with a look of horror on its face. It banged on the door with its fists and cried. At this, everybody laughed. The person who shut the door leaned over and turned a red knob that was on the outside of the shower station, next to a blue knob, right where the water was piped in. It seemed he had turned the hot water on as the window began to fog up. The water was pooling up rapidly, and due to the steam, dripping down from the entire ceiling in addition to the shower head, the child became increasingly frantic. The hot water was undoubtedly scalding it. "Enjoy the purifying pain of the niptron of the stars, my son," said Rosenberg, not acknowledging the child's feminine aspect. "This is nothing like the niptron of Empyrean fire that will soon baptize the entire peasant population of this pathetic prison with its flaming wisdom." He walked up to the shower door and looked directly into the child's eyes through a hole in the fog that its panicked fist-pounding had made. He laughed at the poor thing for another couple of minutes. Then, when the water was up to the child's chest, he announced, "That's enough." 2 others pulled the child out, who was shivering in shock. Another pushed the dissection table out between the congregants and the gradales, with the sewing machine still sitting on one end of it. The body parts that Consivia had been sewing together were gone already. The other two assistants dragged the child over and placed it on the dissection table face down. Then they held it in place as Rosenberg stepped up behind it. The person who had brought the table over now held out for him a can of Lyle's golden syrup and a black umbrella. Rosenberg dropped his pants and slathered up his penis, while the other two forced the child onto his knees with his rump positioned at the end. I turned my head away and shut my eyes, not wanting to see yet another child raped. And this was to be the youngest one yet. But Miles pushed my head back to face the scene. "Open your eyes," he said, "or I'll kill you." I opened them, but purposely kept them out of focus so that I would not see the horrors in front of me very well. Yet I could still hear the horrible sound of the child screaming, and it seemed to me that the rape had already begun. As much as I tried not to see, I peripherally observed that Rosenberg was attempting to open the rectum with his finger and a glob of syrup. At that moment, there was a rumble in the building, like an earthquake. The diamond now flipped itself over and ascended to the very top of the Gradales, to the octagonal window in the ceiling, where it fit perfectly like a puzzle piece. Then the hyper-Uranian rays came through. I don't think the others saw it, because they didn't react. But I saw the diamond, after having been temporarily red, now light up brighter than before, putting out a rainbow of colors all over the place. The fluid in the Gradales took on the appearance of a pousse café, stratified into different colors. Now, when I say different colors, I mean it was a rainbow of colors that I had never seen before. They were sparkling all around me as the diamond rotated, putting out dizzying flashes that threatened to induce a seizure in me. But then the diamond turned green in color and switched its rotation. The light I saw also became green in appearance. The diamond was acting as a deck prism on board a ship, amplifying the light from above the chamber. I could tell that it was filtering this light from normally invisible spectrums, into a form that I could see, although presumably these rays were still quite dangerous, as the glasses worn by the others would indicate. Furthermore, what the new light allowed me to see in the rest of the room was absolutely horrible. The ghastly creatures I now spied filled every single inch of space around me. There were things everywhere, things that resembled in several aspects living beings. It's hard to say what they looked like, because each one was different. Also, you couldn't tell where one ended and the others began. The only individual items I could distinguish in the room were the things I had already seen before the green light entered. Everything else was a mass of grayish-green-colored slimy flesh, consisting of hundreds of beings with black, beady eyes and long proboscis mouths. These mouths were all busy sucking on things, mostly on the bodies of the people in the room. A large number of mouths were also sucking from the hoses hanging from the Gradales. There were insect-like legs on some of these creatures, and tentacles on others. These became enmeshed with those of the other beings as they moved around the room, hungrily chasing emissions from living bodies wherever they might be found. These emissions could be seen by me now as diversely hued jets of light streaming out of particular points on people's bodies. I noticed a large cluster of mouths around the stumps of my legs, with little black reptilian tongues slithering in and out, licking at the blood that had seeped through the bandages. But more, many more, were surrounding the victim on the table, screaming and struggling as the preliminaries of its rape continued. Those closest slurped eagerly. Many others crushed to get close. What was happening on that table clearly put out an energy that they were desperate to drink. I shuddered in revulsion. "They're not just in this room," said my telepathic informant, now crouching before me in the dying body of the Frankenstein creature in the pit beneath the Gradales. "These are the Amaleks. They're everywhere, all the time. You can only see them now because of the hyper-Uranian light." Then I noticed a mess of these monsters crowded around the rear end of the creature in the pit. Some were eating the blood from its wounds and the afterbirth on the ground, but most were eagerly licking and sucking at something else. Its vagina. Something was coming out. It took a moment for me to realize that there was yet another small humanoid hand emerging from it, this one coal-black skin, but with white claws like the first child. The green light had been there for at least a full minute before Rosenberg noticed that I was looking at things that he and the others, because of their glasses, couldn't see. "What do you see?" he asked. "Don't tell him the truth," the informant said in my head. "What should I say?" I asked. "Nonsense," the mental voice replied. "Distract him. Sing a song. Keep him from hearing the other baby's cries. This child is our last chance to prevent the collapse of the pillars of heaven." "What do you see?" Rosenberg insisted angrily. I tried to close my eyes to clear my mind and think of something, but Miles slapped me and told me to open them again, so I couldn't shut out the image of all these parasites sucking off of everybody, and I just could not think of anything to say. No mental voices came along to rescue me, and I began to wonder if my informant was dead, since I had felt him to be inhabiting the head of Pindar that was sewn onto the creature at the bottom of the pit, and that creature seemed to be dying as the second twin ripped its way out. Pindar's head was grimacing in pain but remained silent, presumably choking back the moans so as to keep Rosenberg ignorant of what was happening. The baby's head, however, had begun to emerge, and I knew it was possible that it would begin to scream immediately. I sensed that if Rosenberg knew about the other baby, he would kill it, and that would be the end, somehow, of an opportunity for Earth to escape its apparent impending doom. I wasn't sure how it was going to happen, as my informant had been vague, but I realized that somehow Rosenberg's imminent sodomization of the child of the planetary archons that had been born from Philippine's anus would cause the layers of the universe, already unstable from the sacrifice of most of those archons, to collapse. They could perhaps be regenerated somehow by the child, I thought, but not if the sodomic rite is allowed to continue. I realized that as Rosenberg penetrated the target, he was opening a portal to the Hyper-Uranian realm, the source of the green light I was seeing. I knew that if he managed to totally destroy the child's fundament with his penis, that would somehow undermine the foundations of our world. Then the pillars would collapse and the sky would come down on us. Meanwhile, he would have sucked up, in his own words, all of the child's god power, and somehow used it to escape through the portal to a higher realm outside of our own doomed universe. There, he believed, he would be able to use the contracts that he had spoken of, giving him the right, as he claimed, to all human souls as his property, purchased by his gold. He thought that this could be used to establish himself in a powerful position in the outer realm, as the lord of everything below, even though it would, at that point, presumably, be nothing but a ruin. But there could be alchemical purposes afoot, I thought. Perhaps he is transmuting our entire universe into something else, using it for something we can't even imagine. These were the ideas that came to me as I sat staring at Rosenberg, with him staring at me in disbelief over my insolence, repeating the demand that I tell him what I was seeing. I forgot to lie, but at least I only told part of the truth. The green rays of Hyper-Uranian, I said. I added nothing more. He laughed and turned back around to his task. "Hold him open," he instructed his assistants. They both frowned at this, but reluctantly obeyed, using their hands to spread the victim's buttocks for him, which the grayish-green creatures, invisible to everyone else, licked at ferociously. "Well, that light's about to get a lot brighter. Just tell me what you see." With that, he grabbed his penis again with one hand, the child's thigh with the other, and lurched his pelvis forward towards the rear end. Then one of his assistants deployed the umbrella and held it up over his head, presumably to protect himself from the Hyper-Uranian rays. If he doesn't want to see that light, why does he want to go to the place where it's coming from? I wondered. "Sing, you idiot!" shouted the voice in my head, suddenly returning. "Don't let him go through with it. Distract him." "Return through the rectum is easy," shouted Rosenberg, pointing his finger at the screaming child on the table, just an inch away from achieving his goal of penile penetration. "The distinguished charity of Mete uproots the enemy. I am Saturnus Stercatus, and you are my Stercus. I shall plow you, and then burn the fallow fields with a niptron of fire." The words "niptron of fire" reminded me of something stupid. This happens to me all the time. Even in the worst situations, something I hear another person say will remind me of a song with lyrics that sound similar. It can be any type of song. Even a TV theme song or an advertisement jingle, regardless of how catchy the tune is, or whether or not I like the song in question, it will immediately get stuck in my head, often in altered form. My mind will automatically create a new version with parodied lyrics to fit similar-sounding words I've just heard. Well, this is what happened to me at that moment, and it filled my head with the lyrics to a once popular song. It was not my favorite by any means, and not all that singable for me, really. But Niptron of Fire made me think of that song by the Pointer Sisters from the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack. And so, without a second to lose, I sang out loudly, swaying back and forth in my wheelchair like a brain-damaged moron. "I'm just burning doing the Niptron dance." The distraction worked. Rosenberg stopped what he was doing and turned around to face me. "What did you say?" he asked, confused and annoyed. Just then, I heard the newborn twin cry out from the pit. I sang more to cover it. "I'm just burning doing the Niptron dance. I'm just burning doing the Niptron dance. Hooty hoot, hooty hoot." "What's wrong with you?" Rosenberg said angrily. Then, his look changing to serious and curious, he asked, "Are you hearing a radio station in your head?" But I didn't answer. I just continued singing. As I did so, I saw that Miles had followed my gaze, and now saw the baby coming out, still crying. But instead of alerting Rosenberg, he looked me in the eye for a good second, then began to sing along. "I'm just burning doing the Niptron dance. Woohoo!" As we both sang this together, another light entered the room from above. Everything became brighter. I could still see the Amaleks all around, but they were not as distinct anymore. I looked at the Gradales. The diamond was clear again, and refracting a normal rainbow spectrum of colors quite beautifully all over the room. Real sunlight, I thought. Sunrise on Easter. Hallelujah! But Rosenberg didn't notice this either, so distracted was he by our terrible singing. "Miles, why are you doing this?" Rosenberg screamed. He pounded his fists on the table like a pouting child. "Stop it! I'm losing my erection." While he had been throwing his fit, the twin child had fully emerged, cut its own cord, and was already drinking its fill from the Gradales. It too had grown to the size of a 3-year-old, and while it resembled its brother/sister with its dual sex organs, the coloring of its body was much different. It was piebald, with one leg and foot black, the other set white. The same was true of the hands and arms, but the white and black colors were on opposite sides compared to the legs. The torso, divided into quadrants, was similarly checkered, as was the head. The white segments were marked with black sun shapes, and the black segments covered in white crescents. All this was quite visible, because there was clearly a bright morning sun shining above us now, and also because, while covered in afterbirth, this twin wasn't nearly as mucky as its sibling had been. Now, as Rosenberg approached me and Miles in fury, with the umbrella holder following him uncertainly, the twin came crawling out of the pit behind him. But Rosenberg didn't notice, because he was focused on getting us to shut up. He took the gun from Miles, which it seemed to me that Miles allowed rather easily, and then pointed it at us, repeating his demand for us to be quiet. "Light is frying your brains. Stay cool." "I need to keep focused on my task," he yelled. As he said this, the twin ran behind the Gradales and disappeared in the shadows of the room's machinery. Rosenberg turned back around to return to his rectal raping ritual, placing the gun next to the sewing machine. But then we were joined in our singing by the 3 men that were holding up the Gradales: Paris, Chesterfield, and Leopold. "I'm just burnin' doin' the Niptron dance," they all sang, completely out of sync. "What the fuck?" screamed Rosenberg. "Nymphy, sing the Noziel Eric. These folks want to hear some music, it seems." The young boys in the room immediately began singing, in Greek this time but backwards. I'm pretty sure it was the Greek Orthodox version of Kyrie eleison in reverse, the undoing of the traditional Christian prayer for mercy. The tune was backwards, too, probably an inversion of Franz Schubert's Mass No. 2, composed for this prayer. Meanwhile, Rosenberg chanted the Seder Square once again. Seder. Aripo, tenet, opera, rotas. Seder, aripo, tenet, opera, rotas. Seder, aripo, tenet, opera, rotas. Rosenberg's member dangled perilously close to its desired entry point once again, and with it, seemingly, the fate of our world was hanging in the balance. At that second, which might well have been our last as far as I knew, the dumbest thought ever came to me, spawned by Rosenberg's chanting. The only thing that can save us now is a deus ex machina, I thought. A deus ex machina, a ghost from the machine, is, of course, a term for when dramatic stories have the crisis solved at the end by the sudden appearance of some new element, such as a supernatural being who saves the day. As, for example, the flying chariot sent by her grandfather Helios to rescue the witch Medea at the end of the play by Euripides that's named after her. The machine in the phrase is said to have originally been a reference to a crane that was used in ancient Greek drama to lower the gods in these scenes, or rather the actors playing them, onto the stage. However, this is a little-known detail. Most people who use the phrase assume that the machine is the story itself, and I think the meaning has evolved to include that. It occurred to me that the phrase "Phantom of the Opera" could be reinterpreted to mean the same thing essentially, as opera is Latin for work, and is considered synonymous with machina. Phantasma, meanwhile, is a synonym of eidolon, another Latin word for ghost. In terms of Rosenberg's present working, both terms could refer to his ongoing series of rituals, and the rousing of a spirit that would then determine the final outcome of the ceremonies. As I pondered this, the phantom of the operation made itself known. The piebald twin hermaphrodite now sneaked up behind Rosenberg, who was applying more lyles to its sibling's rectum, and stealthily removed a large pair of surgical scissors lying next to the sewing machine on the table. Then it opened them up and spoke. "Oh, Pater Noster," it said, vibrating the air in the room with a voice of many waters. Everyone else in the room, most of whom had noticed the child moments earlier but reacted very slowly, began to back away from the dissection table in fear. "Ah," said Rosenberg, spinning around. He still hadn't achieved penile penetration of his target, and in fact the child still seemed relatively intact in that regard, judging by what I saw peripherally from my vantage point. Nor would Rosenberg get another chance to deflower it. The instant he turned around, the child's brother/sister removed Rosenberg's manhood expertly, as if it had done so 1,000 times before, at the birth of 1,000 different eons. It took a second for him to realize what had happened. He was still holding his penis when he noticed that it was no longer attached to him. At first, he just dropped his jaw silently, with his eyes wide with horror. Then he dropped the umbrella on the dissection table, where it got caught up against the sewing machine. Finally, he dropped to his knees as he screamed in pain, and his attacker buried the scissors in between his shoulder blades. A fatal blow. The instant he let go of the child on the table, the green light from above and the horrible blood-sucking creatures it revealed vanished from my vision. Then, as if to be thorough, as if to ensure that this penis of terror could never again be used as a weapon against another child, the piebald hermaphrodite caught the genitals in its hand before they hit the ground. It bit off both testicles, swallowed them, and threw the penis into the pit where both twins had been born. Next, it grabbed its sibling around the waist and began helping it down from the dissection table. I saw Rosenberg's body stop moving. He was gone. At this moment, the three men holding the gradales all acted at once on a prearranged signal. "Go!" I heard Leopold shout. All three of them began attempting to stand up, which was quite a struggle. The weight of the fluid-filled vessel must have been enormous. Plus, there was counterpressure coming from its attachment to the ceiling. Then there was another complication, which I hadn't seen before because of the hoods draped over their heads. But when those hoods got lifted up a bit as they were struggling, I saw that all three of them actually had their necks attached to the gradales itself. Their brain stems were being leached, I thought. Then Leopold gave another signal. 3, 2, 1, he said. They rose up sharply in unison, heaving and sighing, with the gradales still on their necks, until the glass cylinder at the top connecting it to the vortex above the ceiling cracked and shattered. A flood of fluids immediately began raining down like from the sluice gates of heaven in the days of Noe. "Go now," Leopold shouted. All three men each reached up with one hand to detach themselves from the neck valves as they simultaneously pushed the gradales backwards with the other. By backwards, I mean that two of them pushed it off of themselves, and necessarily in Leopold's direction, as he also pushed it forward. The gradales tipped over and landed on top of Leopold, shattering and spilling its load around. Most of the contents fell down into the pit where the creature with Pindar's head, Philippine's torso, and my feet, among those of others, stood eviscerated and presumably dead. Leopold, too, now lay face down and motionless on the concrete floor, so he assumed he was deceased as well. The twins had run off somewhere and were no longer visible. Chesterfield and Paris lurched forward, free now, but with clear fluid now dribbling out of their necks. They both took their hoods off quickly and pressed them against the backs of their necks to stop the leaking. Then they each fell forward, onto their hands and knees, in the full genuflect position. Whether by pre-agreed design or instinct, I know not. But the two of them both began praying. "Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison," Chesterfield chanted. That was the real Christian prayer for mercy, and in Greek too, which was uncommon but not unheard of in his native Anglican church, and I've always thought much more authentic than the English translated versions. Paris, next to him, muttered a Mohammedan equivalent in Arabic, Bismillah, ar-Rahman, ar-Rahim. Rosenberg was kneeling next to them too. But he wasn't praying. He was crying, screaming, and bleeding to death. While this was happening, the other congregants were quickly filing out of the room via the exit ramp. But when the one at the front of the line opened the door, an ocean of blood and other human sewage greeted them, flooding into the room. It washed the people on the ramp back down into the room and began filling the floor, making its way towards the pit with the Frankenstein creature in it that had my feet. My feet! I thought again with a pang of longing. I wheeled myself closer to the pit and leaned over in my chair to get a better view. The pit was half full of fluids and broken glass now, but the chimera creature was still standing on its legs of various origins. I couldn't see any breathing, though, and the head was flopped forward in defeat. I saw that the diamond had landed point down directly in Philippine's excoriated pelvis, where it was slowly sinking into the flesh, which seemed to collapse and partially liquefy under its weight, capturing it like quicksand. Next to this, Rosenberg's severed penis had landed halfway on top of the creature's backside, where the vagina and anus had both been ripped open so badly as to form one large hole. That hole now began to collapse inside, swallowing the penis, tip first. The entire torso dissolved into a fleshy, bloody pink mass resembling Play-Doh. Then it coagulated around the diamond, forming a thin membrane over it. This made me think of the similarity of shape between the side profile of the diamond, this sacred keystone, and the human sacrum bone at the center of the pelvis. It occurred to me that this bone actually does act as a keystone for the pelvis and, in a way, for the entire human body, positioned in the center, dispersing the weight of the upper half evenly through the lower half. In fact, if you bent over onto your hands to form an arch with your body, I thought, either forwards, like Nuit, the Egyptian goddess of the night sky, or backwards, like Uranus, the Ouroboros, and Pindar's body, and Baron Carrickfergus. The placement of the sacrum bone would be precisely in the keystone position. As I was watching the creature's bodily transformation in front of me, I noted that the sacrum bone, when detached from the other bones, including the coccyx below, also closely resembles the keystone referred to in the Masonic Royal Arch degree, the one that was used as the official seal for Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. Then I remembered some of the things written in a 1922 book by Masonic writer Manly P. Hall entitled The Initiates of the Flame, in which he states outright that the sacrum bone and the Royal Arch keystone are one and the same. He further asserted that, quote, the head of the Sphinx could be seen in the inverted sacrum bone when it is turned upward, and also in the inverted Masonic keystone. Then he elaborated even more. It is said that in ancient times the Sphinx was the gateway of the pyramid, and that there was an underground passage which led from the Sphinx to Cheops. This would make the symbolism even more perfect, for the gateway to the spirit is through the bodies, according to the ancients. These passages were accompanied by an illustration of the sacrum bone inside the Masonic keystone. According to Egyptologist E. Wallace Budge, as I recalled, the sacrum bone was the root of the sacred Joid pillar, the spine of Osiris, which was thought to hold the different levels of existence apart. He also said, there can be little doubt that the Jayed is a conventional representation of a part of the backbone of Osiris, namely the sacrum bone, which on account of its proximity to the sperm bag was regarded as the most important member of his body. Then I remembered that the ancient Mayans referred to the sacrum bone as portal to the underworld, that being the place of the seven gods. They compared going through it to going into the mouth of a serpent. Presumably this is because of the serpentine shape of the tunnels of the intestines, considered analogous to the infernal caverns by many cultures, including the Greeks and the Hindus. In fact, going back to ancient Babylon, the spiral emblem found throughout the world has been used to represent these tunnels. This association is one of the reasons that intestines were so commonly used for divination, as maps indicating the path that lies ahead. I'm mused about the fact that alchemists have cryptically described their red stone, a product of the alchemical process, as being a bezoar, a word for a clump of undigested food that has been caught inside a living creature's intestines. They called this stone the red sun and the lesser stone, as compared to the ultimate alchemical product, the philosopher's stone, which was believed to be manufactured within, or otherwise utilizing, The brain human, rather. According to the oldest Egyptian alchemists I remembered, the red stone was formed in the human bowels, the same way they thought of gold as being created within the bowels of the earth. This is the same thing as the stone that Rhea gave to Kronos to trick him, I thought as the understanding rushed down upon me. And it's also how he was poisoned, through the anus, blocking his intestines and causing fecal vomiting. Recalling this brought me back in my mind to the Mayan beliefs regarding the sacrum bone, which they sometimes call a second skull, or even the inverted skull, because it sort of looks like one when you separate it from the rest of the skeleton. Then I thought about the Templar symbol of the skull and crossbones, and the fact that it basically shows a head in between two thighs. I wondered if it might be connected to their alleged rite of induction involving the osculum in flame, obscene kiss. The same ritual was allegedly practiced by witches at sabbats, involving a kiss on the devil's second mouth underneath his tail. This brought to mind an articulated reed somewhere, stating that some Jews believed that this is where a deceased person's soul is stored, hibernating until the resurrection at the end of days. At that point, supposedly, all human bodies will regenerate from their sacrum bones if they're lucky enough for that part of their bodies to still be intact, and then everyone will be presented for final judgment. As I contemplated these things, I saw the pelvis of the creature, pregnant now with the diamond, fall downward, as the recently and artificially formed sinews connecting the tissue to the various legs began to melt. It slid slowly to the floor while the legs remained standing. The head fell off and into the surrounding goop. The waterline in the pit started to rapidly rise as the flood of fluids from above flowed down the ramp and across the floor to join the pool below. But when it rose up high enough that the fluids reached the top of my feet, I saw them come alive. They began to twitch and then to stomp. "Come to me!" I shouted to them. And they obeyed. They jumped up high, freeing themselves completely. Then, one at a time, they leapfrogged off the top of what was left of the monster's main body, which was now recongealing around its remaining legs. They sailed through the air directly into my lap, slimy and bloody, like the flying feet of Mercury, I thought to myself. As disgusting as they were a part of me, and I was happy to see them. They seemed to feel the same way. I had to hold the feet down as they continued to hop around my lap in excitement for our reunion. Then I heard something slopping around in the pile of coagulating flesh and blood at the bottom of the pit. I leaned over again for a look. I immediately regretted it. Fresh sinews had just formed between the remaining 3 legs and the torso, which was now a triangle. Tentacles of bloody, rubbery meat reached out from the stumps to merge with it. Pindar's head fell backwards and dissolved into the mess. But his facial features, with his mouth curled in agony, now appeared within the triangle. Within less than a minute, I was looking at a real, living trinacria with a reddish-pink triangle in the center. The freakish creature was surrounded with the presently knee-deep and ever-growing puddle of sludge that was still pouring into it down the ramp from the floors above us. The eye caught my gaze as the grimace turned into a delighted smile that sent a shuddering chill through me. "Thank you," the voice of my informant said to me in my head. "Now Albion can rise again. Now I can come home to Jerusalem on the Thames." But then the face twisted in pain again, and its body convulsed once more, just as it had during the birth of each twin. Well, as it turned out, it was not just a set of twins. They were triplets. A third sibling now began to emerge from the place where Pindar's head had been attached to the body. It was covered in a pink membrane sac, but through it I could see 2 dark hooves. By the time half of it was out, I could tell that the membrane sac around it was actually a human stomach and attached esophagus, the latter with the front hooves stuck through it. The outline of a tiny horse head could be seen at the top of the stomach, twitching side to side. But at this point, the birth seemed to stall. The baby horse was stuck. The face in the triangle howled. Its voice sounded so ancient and loud. It reverberated through the whole room, perhaps the whole building, perhaps the whole world. I heard a rumbling sound all around us, along with a trembling sensation coming through the floors and walls. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something stirring from behind the pit, amid the broken glass of the grateles. It was Leopold. He was getting up. I couldn't tell how badly he was hurt because he was covered in filth, but he was able to get up onto his feet, take off his hood, press it against his leaking neck, then walk over to the pit and slide down into it, all without looking up at me. Next, He went over to where the little foal, about the size of a small cat, was still struggling to be born. He grabbed its front legs and yanked it straight out, then caught the whole thing with both hands before it fell down. He walked up to the edge of the pit, sloshing through the sludge, and lifted the foal up over the side. He placed it down on the floor in front of me, still inside the stomach, where it continued to twitch. After letting go, he fell backwards onto his butt and sat silently in the pool of sewage. Then the twins came out from hiding. They had been inside the emergency shower and had apparently used it just now without me noticing, the noise drowned out by all the rest. The piebald one was now clean, and the blue one had washed the syrup off itself. They were both quite beautiful. I was happy to see them looking relatively well. Silently, in my own mind, I uttered a prayer to what God I could not say, asking that they should be allowed to somehow survive this ordeal. I knew the future of existence itself somehow depended on it. Both children, who from birth had always known innately what they needed to do, now gathered around the membrane-covered foal and, using their claws, ripped open the stomach, freeing it. The horse, which looked like it was probably white but was covered in goo, continued to twitch on the floor for a minute or so, while the piebald twin grabbed the tub of pee-pee-roni from the refrigerator. Then the toddler toddled back over to the foal and knelt down next to its head. The child took the cover off of the tub, revealing, as I had suspected, small preserved human penises. The foal smelled the meat, and then sat up eagerly. The child fed it one, then another, with the child and its sibling helping themselves to a few as well. The horse began to grow before my eyes just like the two children had done, and did even more as they too ate the penises. Then the horse began stretching out its wings. Yes, it had wings. Maybe it needs some water, I thought. I wheeled myself over to the shelves over the fridge, which was no easy task now that the floor was flooded, and looked for an uncontaminated vessel to put water in. At first there was no luck. Every beaker, jar, and bottle was full of either biohazard material or harsh chemicals. Then I found a large beaker labeled H20 on the bottom shelf. It was half full. It was. I could reach it, just barely. I grabbed it and brought it to the eye wash station, where I filled it up so that I had about a liter of water. I wheeled the beaker over to where the children were feeding the horse and handed it to the blue one. The child looked up at me and smiled in gratitude. Each of the kids took a long draught. Then they gave the rest to the horse, who drank it greedily. They were all a bit larger by the end of this. The foal stood up finally and exercised its wings a bit more. I saw that it was male. Both children led the horse over to the shower, where they washed off the afterbirth. When the foal came out of the booth a minute later, he looked much better. I could see that his fur was definitely white. The two children now walked the foal over to the dissection table, which they were both able to climb on top of. This enabled them to mount the back of the horse. The piebald one sat in front. The blue one turned around to wave at me and smile, as the piebald one leaned forward and patted the horse's neck. It neighed, whinnied, reared up, and then took off, up the ramp and through the exit door. I knew where it was headed next. The ramp winds all around the building, I thought. That will give it plenty of runway to build up speed so it can take off. About a minute later, a shock wave shook the room, like the one I had experienced during dinner at Newcourt, but louder, with a similar waterphone-like sound reverberating through the air. A clear glass container, shaped somewhat like a Kool-Aid pitcher, fell off the shelf towards my lap. I caught it with my hands before it landed. It was filled with a translucent pinkish liquid and labeled Liquor Amni plus Proteans. At the bottom of the vessel was a dead human fetus, about an inch in length, like a worm in a bottle of tequila. I shuddered at the sight of its beady eyes. Then I heard a thunderous crash from the floor above us. I looked up. There was the body of Bear. About a minute later, a shockwave shook the room, like the one I had experienced during dinner at Newcourt, but louder, with a similar waterphone-like sound reverberating through the air. A clear glass container, shaped somewhat like a Kool-Aid pitcher, fell off the shelf towards my lap. I caught it with my hands before it landed. It was filled with a translucent pinkish liquid and labeled Liquor Amni plus Proteans. At the bottom of the vessel was a dead human fetus, about an inch in length, like a worm in a bottle of tequila. I shuddered at the sight of its beady eyes. Then I heard a thunderous crash from the floor above us. I looked up. There was the body of Baron Carrickfergus, smashed against the bottom of the vortex. I couldn't tell if this last blow had been the one to finally extinguish his life. As before, the eyes were still frozen open. I turned around again, towards the pit, and surveyed the scene around me. Paris and Chesterfield were still praying. Rosenberg was slumped over on his knees, perhaps dead. As for Leopold and the Trinacria in the pit, their present status was unknown to me. But then I heard Leopold's voice coming from the pit. "You should look for the bottle marked liquor amnii plus proteins on the shelf, Pamela." Yes, he said proteins, I thought to myself. So it wasn't just a misspelling of proteins. "You can use it to put your feet back on your legs." I immediately looked in his direction. "How?" I asked. "I have it right here. Come on over here." "I'll help you," he said. I wheeled over to the pit through the sludge on the floor, past the unconscious body of Rosenberg and the kneeling figures of the two MI5 agents, who remained oblivious to all else but their mantras. As I approached, Leopold stood up from within the pit, so that he was now visible from about the waist up. He had tied his hood around his leaking neck. His fancy suit was covered in revolting filth, the stench of which I barely noticed anymore. He held out both of his mangled hands in a cupped position. "Give me the feet and unwrap your stumps," he instructed. But I didn't trust him. He was the one who had cut them off in the first place. I just sat there and stared at him severely. "Look, you're going to need my help. You need to regenerate the broken bone that was removed. No doctor can do that for you." I looked at the feet in my lap. Then I unwrapped my stumps, which were hurting again as the morphine had worn off. Also, I had felt the phantom limb sensation several times already. But now my ankles were crying out for the feet like a lover separated from her beloved. The wounds were looking gangrenous and infected. "Hand over the feet, then pour the elixir on when I give you the signal," Leopold said. Reluctantly, I gave them up. He placed both feet onto the stumps. I could feel the flesh on the end of my ankles, eagerly embracing the contact with the estranged limbs. But he was right. A portion around the breakpoint had been removed. The two ends didn't exactly match up anymore, and even if my body accepted them as is, I'd now be shorter than I was before. Still, it was better than no feet at all. I waited to see what would happen. Leopold seemed to lift up on one side of his body, like he had just put his foot on top of something. Then he closed his eyes, as if straining for something. He gave the signal. "Pour!" he shouted. I poured the elixir liberally on the ends of each piece. As soon as I had done so, I felt an electric current run from Leopold's body through the feet and into my legs. It riveted him in place, but did not seem to be harming him. He just looked directly into my eyes, intensely for the next few seconds, without moving. Immediately I felt the feet beginning to adhere to my ankles. I witnessed the miracle of new flesh forming, just as it had when the creature that had borrowed my feet reformed itself into a Trinacria. As it coagulated, the meat gelled into a spongy substance before solidifying. During these few seconds of plasticity, Leopold slowly and expertly pulled my feet down an inch, so that the missing segment was reformed, good as new, including, somehow, the bone and marrow within. "Astounding," I said, involuntarily, with my mouth wide open in amazement. Within a few moments, the electricity stopped. Leopold let go, and the feet stayed in place, continuing to meld with the leg. A few seconds after that, I found that I could feel them again. The sensation spread from my ankles down to my toes as my nerves came alive once more. I flexed my toes gleefully. All these little piggies went to market, I thought, and now they're all home. Wee, and not a moment too soon. Leopold had now climbed out of the pit, which I found threatening. I instinctively jumped on my newly recovered feet to run away. But when I tried to take a step, they buckled under me. I found myself on my knees between Paris and Chesterfield, positioned the same way they were. I retched at the smell of the gook that was pooling up around my legs. Leopold walked over to a panel of switches on the wall and flipped one. Something happened inside the pit. The creature screamed, but his scream trailed off. It was falling down, along with everything else that had been pooling up in the recess. The bottom must have been a trapdoor, and Leopold had opened it. I heard a splash as everything hit water in the depths below. The Walbrook, I thought. He just threw the Trinacria into the Walbrook. Then the ground beneath us began to quake, and a large crack formed in the floor of the room. I decided that begging God for mercy, whomever he or she might be, was a prudent thing to do at that point. I knelt and bowed my head, but not so far over that I couldn't keep an eye on what was happening. Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. I droned as soon as I started. Paris, without looking up, switched from Arabic to Greek and joined us. The sound of our chanting vibrated strangely through the air, as though we were speaking directly into the whirring blades of a fan. A breeze seemed to be blowing down the ramp from the floors above. Then there was another rumble, louder than the others. The ceiling and walls were all cracking now. The vortex and its contents came crashing down through the ceiling to the floor behind us. We were dusted by this, but because we had our heads pointed down, we managed to avoid being hit in the face by shards of glass, and everything seemed to magically bounce off our backs. The body of Baron Carrickfergus fell down into the pit and hit the underground river below. The fragrant fluids and broken glass spread more broadly, contributing several more inches to the overall flooding of the room. But luckily for us, the fluids were falling into pit and other cracks in the floor now. This meant that it was draining away from our particular position. Leopold then chose to come over and kneel in the middle of our triangle with us. There he uttered his own prayer. "Mother Rock, have mercy. Stand firm beneath us, we implore you," he said. "Deliver us from the mire." Strangely, while addressing a pagan goddess, he quoted Psalm chapter 69, verse 14. Then he went on, mumbling in what sounded like Gaelic? Elvish? I'm not sure. Now, Mother Rock is another way of saying Mother Lode, and simply refers to the main vein among any collection of underground ore deposits. But I am pretty sure he was praying to the Magna Mater, the Rock Sabelle. Yet I suppose it could be taken either way, considering what was subsequently revealed beneath the ground on which we were kneeling. Then all at once there was a sharp jolt from below and the ground all around us collapsed. Everything was gone except for a small circle, about 8 feet in circumference, around where we happened to be kneeling. But I didn't have time to appreciate the miracle of being so chosen for preservation, because the ceiling came down on top of us. Yet here again, most of it seemed to somehow just fall away from us, into the immeasurable abyss surrounding us. Not all of it, however. The last thing I remember before I lost consciousness, just before a piece of masonry hit me in the head, was seeing 3 large yellow circles directly above me in the light blue morning sky, arranged in triangular formation. In an instant, they coalesced into one yellow orb, which immediately started bleeding and fell out of the sky. This left a circle in the sky where it had been, appearing as an indigo field studded with white stars, which then immediately opened like a window, revealing a huge eye that stared back at me. It blinked, and I blacked out. Chapter 25, Albion's Aeon. The light of this star surpassed that of all the others. Its brilliance was ineffable, and its novelty was such that all those who looked at it were struck with astonishment. The sun, moon, and the stars formed a choir round this star. Street. Ignatius, Epistle to the Ephesians. Okayness is not only a concept that is relative to the situation, but one which, quite often, when invoked, teeters dangerously on the verge of being meaningless, threatening to render impotent the dramatic import of anything which preceded it. Therefore, when Leopold Black / Thomas Weir, having pulled a stone away from the rubble that buried me, asked, with a disfigured hand extended, if I was okay, I did not have an immediate response. I opened my eyes, but as they began to adjust to the light and to focus on Leopold's face, I remembered once again how he had tricked me getting involved in this nightmare. I tried to move my feet to push off whatever was weighing on them, cutting off the circulation. Then I recalled that the man standing over me had actually sawed them off the previous night, so I decided just to close my eyes again, thinking that my feet were still gone. It wasn't until I heard Paris and Chesterfield's voices amidst a cacophony of sirens and car alarms also that I opened my eyes again. Then it came back to me, how my feet had been restored, and how the small piece of land we stood on had somehow been spared from what seemed at the time like both the collapse of the earth and the collapse of the sky. Paris lifted a piece of the digital ceiling, with its hexagonal light grid, up off of my ankles. My feet were really there. What's more, I could move them. It was painful and the muscles were stiff, but they did respond to my mental commands. I sat up. Then I heard the piece of ceiling that Paris had just thrown over his shoulder hit bottom after an extended delay and with a splash. A splash? I thought. Why? And how far down did it fall? At first, my eyes focused on the three men directly before me, who were all staring back at me with concern. They all looked worse for the wear, dirty and badly beaten, but surprisingly unfazed considering the circumstances, especially the wounds I recalled them having on their necks, underneath the hoods that were still tied around their necks as tourniquets. But then my eyes adjusted to take in the surrounding landscape. A few feet behind the men that stood in front of me, the earth dropped off into an abyss, all the way around. With help from Chesterfield, I stood up to get the full panoramic view. I tried to get closer to the edge of our island of safety, but the others insisted I shouldn't look straight down right now because it was scary. They also said it would be dangerous, since it was still quite difficult for me to stand without using Chesterfield as a crutch. So I looked around us, which was shocking enough. We were surrounded by a vast chasm in the ground, which, from the sound of it, was at least partially filled with water now and quickly becoming fuller. The entire site had vanished, the whole of Bucklersbury, and everything around it, from Queen Street to Lothbury to Grace Church, all the way down to the banks of the Thames, in a perfect circle. Rosenberg Plaza, the Walbrook Building, St. Stephen's, New Court, the Bank of England, the Bullion Association, Mansion House. They were all gone. I turned to the south and saw the river unobstructed in front of me, with a waterfall pouring down from it into the depths beneath. There it joined up with the Walbrook, which was now open to the light of the sun once again and rapidly forging a brand new mouth for itself. The collapse of the earth below had caused 3 bridges to fall there also: Southwark Bridge, the Cannon Street Rail Bridge, and London Bridge. But of course you know about the sinkhole in London that formed suddenly on Easter morning 2018, creating a precisely round hole in the earth a half-mile in circumference right next to the Thames, except for the estimated 9x9 plot of land that we 4 stood upon. You surely know then that this anomalous spindle of soil disintegrated while we watched from above in awe as soon as the rescue helicopter lifted the last of us up off of its surface. I wondered, of course, if it was our prayers that prevented us from being subsumed by the mire, a la Psalm chapter 69, verse 14, as referenced earlier by Leopold. Deliver me out of the mire, and let me not sink. Therefore, I gave thanks accordingly, silently, with Psalm chapter 40. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay. If you already knew about the sinkhole, then you undoubtedly know about the Herculean efforts that were made to rescue all the other casualties of this catastrophe. As I write this, they are still working to dam up the river, pump the water out of the hole, and fill it in with concrete. It's the largest construction project in London since the building of Rosenberg Plaza, which now, ironically, must take a step down in history to become the second largest. The Prime Minister, enthusiastically embracing the broken window fallacy, has praised and taken credit for the economic stimulation this has caused. But the real stimulus has come, of course, from the unique new element that was discovered within the depths of the chasm and from the worldwide sovereign debt jubilee that was negotiated beginning the following Wednesday during talks between G20 heads of state, the International Monetary Fund, and the Bank of International Settlements. Experts in karst topography and water table science told the news reporters that this was a disaster waiting to happen. The land was already inherently unstable because of the network of underground rivers, which, they said, after lying dormant for over a century, had been partially reactivated in recent years by state-sponsored environmental scientists as part of the London Rivers Action Plan, which Rosenberg had bragged to us about at dinner on Friday night. Thus, the underground development that had taken place in the intervening centuries since these rivers were last active, everything from miles of subway and service tunnels to multi-level basements and massive buildings, contributed to the weakening of the foundation beneath many of the structures. So it didn't help that Rosenberg, in collusion with some friends in the Corporation of London governing the city, decided to rechannel the underground waters on the sly without permission, restoring the Walbrook to full capacity years ahead of schedule. Water had since been pooling up in caves that had been formed by the underground river over thousands of years. All it took was a seismic jolt to get the process going, though nobody's sure what caused that. England is far away from the world's major fault lines, but the motion of the tectonic plates elsewhere can still cause regional compression that affects the island. There hadn't been another earthquake with its epicenter in London since 1750, and the one in 2018 was unrelated to tectonic movement. However, many earthquakes have affected London throughout its history. Supposedly one in the 5th century leveled the Temple of Apollo, that is rumored to have once sat beneath the present location of Westminster Abbey. Other earthquakes, with their epicenters elsewhere, have been felt especially in that place many times, often accompanied by strange lights seen near the cathedral. One such earthquake, which took place on April 6, 1580 during Easter week, originated in the Dover Straits and inspired the following poem by James Yates. "O sudden motion and shaking of the earth, no blustering blasts, the weather calm and mild. Good Lord, the sudden rareness of the thing a sudden fear did bring to man and child. They verily thought, as well in field as town, the earth should sink, and the houses all fall down." Well, let verses print this present in our hearts, and call to God, for noyer need we more, crawing of him mercy for our misdeeds, our sinful lives from heart for to deplore. For let verses think this token doth portend, if scourge near hand, if we do still offend. Another earthquake, which originated in Canterbury on May 21, 1382, was associated in the popular mind with a synod called by the Archbishop of Canterbury that took in the Blackfriars area of the City of London. The purpose was to condemn the heretic John Wycliffe for his doctrine on transubstantiation. Wycliffe eventually died of a stroke, still amid controversy, but he was later excommunicated in 1415. His bones were eventually exhumed by Pope Martin V in 1428 to remove them from consecrated ground, then burnt to ashes and dumped into the River Swift. With the London earthquake and aftershocks of 2018, it is thought by some that a chemical reaction took place right underneath the Mithraeum, where the Rosenberg Plaza alembic system connected with the Walbrook. I believe this is accurate. This was the real reason why the London stretch of the Thames, all of London's underground rivers, and much of the local tap water turned to blood for a time. It wasn't because the red moon had fallen into the river, although this is obviously connected on the mythopoeic level. One of the many meaningful coincidences that occur along with a supernatural event of this magnitude. Tests confirmed that the red stuff in the water really was largely blood, along with other human biofluids one would expect to find when sewage leaks into the water supply. But they also found many rare chemicals not normally found in traceable amounts. Officials admitted to the public that Rosenberg restored the Walbrook to obtain the volume of water he needed for the bizarre and illegal scientific experiments taking place in the basement of Rosenberg Plaza. They claimed that he was attempting to create red mercury, a solid form of the element rumored to exist, and to be used in the creation of nuclear bombs, but which is quite possibly just fictional. However, several real, set up by intelligence agents, terrorist plots have been foiled that involved attempts by the criminals to purchase what they believed would be red mercury. There are stories circulating which allege that red mercury can be used to create gold, to locate buried treasure, like a magic peepstone, or to invoke jinn, an Arabic word for demons. One popular urban legend states that Singer's sewing machines contain red mercury, which the news media claims is the reason that Rosenberg's company purchased thousands of those machines over the previous year. But I think that the real red mercury, the real red stone of the alchemists, was made in that ritual when the Superman diamond became transmuted with the invisible pink light from the heavens. The emerald stone of the alchemists was then formed when it was hit with the hyper-Uranian light. This green diamond was the real kryptonite that created the explosion. Officials have never identified or even acknowledged the 736 victims of the 2-year-long orgy of death that had taken place there. To this day, I still don't know if they were mostly kidnapped victims, adopted for the purpose, or given over as sacrifices by their parents and raised in secret. But it seems to me that the answer could be any of these, or a combination of all three. Of course, these are just some of the many details that I don't know. These are only known to the people who were involved in orchestrating the rituals. Of those people, the ones that I can identify have all either disappeared or died. I haven't seen any of them since that day. Leopold got on board the helicopter with us when it came to our rescue an hour later. But there were paramedics on board, not police. Nobody handcuffed or tied him down. When we got to the St. Bartholomew's Hospital, which was overwhelmed with victims of the sinkholes, he disappeared. But, you'll be relieved to know, Chesterfield's cat Lenore was there at the hospital waiting for him. She had been left at the office of Nahid Paris, Parvin's sister, who ran the IT department from the basement of the hospital. I actually got to meet this woman, because I was sent down to her office to fetch the cat, while the two agents engaged in a top-secret debriefing with their boss, Miss Equitone. I had assumed she would be a Muslim, like her brothers seemed to be, so I was surprised to find a sign on Nahid's bulletin board showing a diamond shape, like the Superman logo, with crossed lines on it forming 7 facets on the crown, just like the one on the QAPHQA sign. Inside of these facets were 6 eyes, with the one in the center filled with text from the Bible. It was Zechariah chapter 3 verse 9, describing a stone with not 6 but 7 eyes. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the graving thereof, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. I assumed the cosmic purpose for the poster being there was for me to see it, at the moment which I did, so that I would be reminded yet again how perfectly every little bit of reality has been arranged for us. Lenore scratched Chesterfield as soon as she saw him, which was probably the worst injury he endured through this entire ordeal, strangely enough. There was no trace of the neck incisions, and no sign of spinal fluid loss on either Chesterfield or Paris by the time doctors examined them. My ankles seemed as good as new. You could not tell, even on an X-ray, that they had ever been cut, or that the bones had been broken. These are among the many mysteries from this episode, which remains unsolved. There is still one mystery in particular that I often ponder, though. If Rosenberg had managed to escape to the Hyper-Uranian realm, as he had planned, what would have happened to the rest of us? On the one hand, it seemed like we were in danger of existential collapse. At the same time, he seemed to speak of enslaving us, using us all as a source of sustenance for those on the other side, and as collateral for making deals with them. Would that have been possible if the realm above had crashed down on us after the mysterious pillars of heaven fell? You might think we'd all be dead, and our universe snuffed out. In one sense, yes, certainly. But now I realize that everything beneath our feet is a foundation provided by the past, keeping us from sinking into the depths of chaos. Our ancestors from forgotten eons provide a valuable service, holding us up on their shoulders, bearing the burden of the present. If the pillars fell, then we would become the new foundation for the future, holding up the new eon on our backs, like slaves. Then, just like the titans before us, some of us would be fated to serve in the role of Atlas as the pillars of the new heaven. It might even be that most of those who populated the new realm wouldn't even realize that we were doing this for them, because they would think of us as dead, or even worse, as simply mythical. Maybe that has already happened to us, and neither we, nor those exploiting us from above are aware of it. A good parallel is the story of Atlantis, which is at once described by myth-tellers as a fallen, quote, city, and also as a representation of an entire fallen eon. Its name derives from that of its fabled foundational king, a guy named Atlas, said to be a son of Poseidon. Now, he just happens to have the same name as the Titan from the Golden Age, who was enslaved by Zeus after the Olympian Revolution, thereafter burdened with the obligation to eternally uphold the sky. This is a clue that the fallen eon, symbolized by Atlantis, had its own pillars of heaven, represented in Plato's tale by the 2 pillars of the Temple of Poseidon, said to be in the city's center. When Atlantis fell, these pillars collapsed, and who knows if one caused the other, or if there was another cause common to both events. Everything was submerged into the waters of chaos, becoming mire, which eventually solidified and was used as the foundation for the eon that came afterwards. In my mind, the story really represents the fall of the Golden Age, when the Titans were imprisoned beneath the earth and made to serve as the foundation of the realm above them. It's quite possible that Rosenberg himself is the only person who knew fully what he was up to. His minions didn't, and the self-appointed geniuses of esoteric statecraft, the Worshipful Society of Butchers, certainly didn't. Perhaps Consivia knew. Maybe she killed herself in front of her congregation during Easter Mass because the truth was too horrible, knowing that all of those murders and rapes were for nothing. I imagine that, after being kidnapped, castrated, and then raped repeatedly throughout her youth, she had to cling desperately to Rosenberg's vision of escape from the earthly prison and conquering the realm of the Godhead above in order to live with what she'd been through. It certainly wasn't depression from gender identity disorder, as the press office of her parish claimed, that made her disembowel herself with an ancient ceremonial harpe just after raising the Eucharist host up to the light of the three suns shining through the crucifix on the stained glass window behind the altar. While we were in the helicopter, just before he disappeared again, I asked Leopold if he had known Consivia before, since he had called himself the Baron of Alphamstone, while she had been living and working there for years. He didn't really answer. She had an axe to grind against the butchers and barber surgeons, he replied. The Stockholm Syndrome didn't prevent her from feeling resentment towards those who had helped the Comprachicos destroy her body. Then he closed his eyes, shook his head, and fell silent for the rest of the ride. Comprachicos is a Spanish word coined by Victor Hugo for gangs that steal and mutilate children, then use them as freak performers or panhandlers, emphasizing their deliberately created disabilities to elicit donations. I presume Leopold used this term to refer to those who had arranged for the boy to be kidnapped from Piccadilly Circus and castrated in 1956, turning him into the sad, frightened girl we saw in the Easter dress in the second half of Easter Sunday April Fool, the poor waif who grew up to be the Bishop of London. I had a revelation regarding Consivia when I entered Nahid's office at the hospital. She was wearing large red headphones when I came in, which she took off immediately. I heard the song Dear Prudence bleeding faintly out of the headphones as they sat on her desk. I remembered that one of the interpretations of the name of the goddess Metis was prudence, along with cunning and wisdom. This made me think again about my idea that Metis, Rhea, and Gaia were all the same figure. A goddess who kept helping her son plot against their father, only to marry the son afterwards and start the process over again in the next generation. Then I thought about how Metis was prophesied to produce an heir that would overthrow Zeus, but the only child they are known to have made together was Athena, while the figure who seems to have actually taken over the role as king of the gods was Jesus, as I mentioned before. The ancient writings, claiming that Apollo was his firstborn son and therefore successor, are hinting that the Greeks knew this was coming. The Romans, with their numerous solar cults popular at the decline of the empire, were the ones to usher it in, as I stated previously. When I got the chance, I researched the word Opa Consivia. A specific entry had been made for this term in Wikipedia sometime the previous year. It had not been there a few months earlier, when I was trying to help the man I hired to translate Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum figure out the meaning of the word Consivia, which he did not at first know what to make of. But now there was an entry for this word, where it was said to be the name of a pair of festivals for the goddess Ops, the Roman name for Rhea, the wife of Saturn, held on August 25th and also on December 19th, 2 days after the commencement of Saturnalia. The first Opa Consivia took place right after the August 21st planting festival for Saturn, called Consualia, which was named after the god's alternate title of Consis. I noted mentally that August 21st had been the date of the solar eclipse the previous year, and wondered what role that had played in the symbolism of Rosenberg's Mithras cult. It probably had a very special orgy in the Mithraeum that day, I thought. The name Ops means plenty, and Consivia, as I stated before, means to sow. Mythology experts claim that she was first associated with planting and harvesting. This connected her to the earth in the minds of the ancients, and everything that was thought to be under it. This is how she became a symbol of the underworld and mineral wealth also, they say, just like Saturn, whose name is connected to Satyr, full, rich, and Satyritas, abundance, satiety. Thus, Saturn and Ops have a lot in common with the king and queen of hell, Pluto, the Roman Hades, and Proserpina, the Roman Persephone. Interestingly, a minor character in the Roman Catholic canon is Saint Satyr, who I think is quite possibly an iconotropic cover for Saturn, and whose feast day is on March 26th. After learning about Opa Consivia, I understood that I was right about the goddess who had given birth to each new king of the gods in each eon and protected him from the wrath of his father. Is he always the sun god, I wondered, or is that just the language we use for the concept now, because the sun is the king of the gods now? I still don't know the answer. But meditating upon the meaning of the lyrics to Dear Prudence once again, I realized that it's a song about Metis emerging from the body of Zeus for the first time in at least an eon, possibly two, at the dawning of a new one. It's about the old world order being subsumed by the birth of the next. I believe that's what I witnessed taking place, both in the rituals at Bucklersbury and in the sky's firmament. I also thought again about the words in the Sator square. Sator, as I stated before, is Saturn, the sewer, the begetter, the father. Arepo, it occurs to me now, might well stand for Harpo, another name for Eros, aka Cupid, the child of Aphrodite. Tenet, we know, means to hold. Rotas, like I said, means wheels, and has always been combined with opera, work, when interpreting the formula. So it is commonly rendered Saturn and Arepo hold and work the wheels. Although my Eros interpretation for Arepo could render it, the sewer of love works the wheels, or some combination of the various conjugations of those words. But opera could also refer specifically to Saturn's partner, Apis, the planter, and some kind of work that she did with him involving these wheels. I think there may be some connection with what William Blake referred to as the starry wheels, which revolve heavily in the mighty void above the furnaces, in his poem Jerusalem. This poem was obviously very important to Rosenberg when composing the rituals, for reasons that I will explain shortly. It was quoted repeatedly at the end of the New Court ritual, and I recall being inspired by the voice of Kronos in my head to mention starry wheels in regards to the carriage ride in the New Court ceremonies. I figure the wheels are the invisible controls that move the celestial bodies above us. I know that not everyone in the world had the same experience of the signs in the heavens that Easter weekend. In fact, the only witnesses to these events appear to be the people who were in the square mile of the City of London at the time. There really weren't very many people in the business district on a holiday weekend, even among those who were there. Most of those who have survived claim not to have seen the events in the sky. This was because, for some reason, almost all of them spent an inordinate amount of time sleeping that weekend. They only woke up when the earthquakes and the sinkhole formation jolted them. The few who were awake and watching the skies in the City of London during this time saw the moon grow large on Friday night at sunset. If they kept watching, they then saw the six-colored balls of light gather around the moon from various directions, just as I saw out the window of the skybox at New Court. Shortly after this, witnesses experienced what seemed like a shockwave that went through the air, and sonic boom heard at the same time. But no recordings or measurements taken corroborate this. These people generally report that at first the light balls looked like planets usually do when you catch a rare glimpse of one making itself visible to light-polluted London. But because of the way in which they appeared from out of nowhere, and because of their subsequent inexplicable behavior, they can only be categorized as UFOs. Besides, there was no conjunction of planets scheduled on any ephemeris that night. Many things were witnessed next that I didn't get to see myself because I was inside the Mithraeum at the time. Around 8 p.m., about a half hour after sunset, people saw the moon emit a beam of bluish-white light directly into the Thames for a few seconds. Those who were on the waterfront on the north side of the river from Temple to the Tower of London, as well as those driving along the Blackfriars and London bridges, saw the beam drop down into the water between the Millennium and Southwark bridges. The beam was wider at its source and got narrower towards the bottom. Some people say it almost looked like the moon was being projected in the sky from a beam of light on Earth. This, of course, gave fodder to people who believe that everything in the sky is a holographic projection. They have videos on YouTube claiming that everything that was seen in the sky from London over the weekend was a, quote, in the Matrix. This is fitting, for after his death, it was revealed that Rosenberg was the leader of secret syndicate of, quote, tech billionaires who had been the subject of news stories 2 years earlier, without being named at the time. The articles published simultaneously by several news outlets claimed the syndicate's members were convinced that our reality was just a computer simulation run from somewhere else. They were supposedly funding research projects to find a way out of the Matrix. The Atlantic's headline at least properly stated that the businessmen's goal was to, quote, destroy the universe. But they didn't mention that the methods would involve alchemy, rape, murder, and black magic, or that only a few members of Earth's population were slated to make it out safely to the other side. At about 8:30, witnesses report that one of the spheres next to the moon grew larger. It was the pinkish-white one, which they say initially looked like the evening star, but wasn't in Venus' proper location. People then describe a glowing stream of something pouring out of it like water into that same spot in the Thames, appearing pink like moonlight. They also saw a small red dot form in the center of the moon at about 9 o'clock. The next sphere to enlarge and pour forth its essence into the river at about 9:15 was the orange-red star, which took on a fiery appearance as it grew. It shot forth what looked like a flame into the Thames. Approximately 45 minutes after that, the pink orb plunged from the sky all of a sudden, landing at the same spot in the river, leaving ripples in its wake. Following that, the orange-red fireball also fell from the sky, smoking as it came down. Because this took place shortly after the war drama created by the torpedoing of the Russian submarine in the Strait of Dover, for which we still have no explanation, some observers thought it was a missile attack. Others thought it was a meteor. Luckily, tensions did not escalate further, and the incident was smoothed over in the coming days, as you know. Next, around 11 o'clock, about the time that our hastily arranged ceremony on the rooftop terrace of Newcourt began, people saw the whole arrangement of moon and stars eclipsed by dark clouds, just as we experienced. Then they saw the purple orb peeking through, now enormous in the sky and hovering directly above the city. It emitted a lightning bolt which, people said, must have hit one of the office buildings. A few minutes later, those present report, the purple orb let down a yellow rope of some sort, which hung for a moment between the orb and the River Thames, before detaching and dropping down into the same spot in the water that the other orbs and their emissions had dropped into. At about 11:15, the moon and one of the strange lights next to it reappeared from the clouds. The greatest detail about this part comes from a homeless man named Slow Henry, interviewed in a popular YouTube video, who stood on Blackfriars Bridge for 2 days watching the show. Next, he says, one of lights seemed to grow to the exact same size as the moon in seconds. It looked just like the sun, except that it did not light up the earth or the sky at all. Slow Henry reports that the sun-like object pulsated for a while, and then merged halfway with the moon for a few minutes. He specified that the moon still had one large red dot in the middle of its face before this merger. According to Henry, the yellow orb actually changed the color of the portion of the moon that it merged with during the union, including that of the red dot. Afterwards, when they separated, the moon's original red dot had grown even larger, and a new, smaller one, just like it had begun to form, right beside it. Shortly after that, the purple orb also merged with the moon, just briefly. Afterwards, the larger red splotch in the middle had gotten bigger still. Then the purple orb drooped beneath the others, finally plummeting down moments later into the same area of the Thames as the others. This is estimated to have occurred at 11:30. According to other witnesses who were closer to the area of impact, the purple orb appeared much larger in size than the previous light balls and made a more noticeable splash when it touched down. About 5 minutes later, say observers, an indigo-colored laser beam came down from out of nowhere in the sky, or at least from no visible source. It shot down into the Thames, and a black sphere was seen descending upon it, becoming smaller along the way. Then at approximately 11:45, the moon was half eclipsed, very briefly. Afterwards, the largest red circle inside was noted to be even larger, and it grew bigger as people watched. The moon changed even more over the next quarter of an hour, witnesses say. It became dark red all over, fading to black at the edges, and the red spots that were there before now became distinguished by their bright glow. A third red glowing spot, smaller than the others, formed within it also. At about midnight, all of the dark clouds that had enveloped the city of London alone suddenly dissipated, Next, a flying carriage with 4 horses was seen by some crossing the sky, which one might associate with Santa Claus had it been Christmas. But on this occasion, people who saw it thought only of the 4 horsemen of St. John's Revelation. Of course, each horse in that story is supposed to be ridden by an angel and not tied with a team to a small, scythed chariot. However, classical education has been absent from British schools for decades. Nobody knows Greek or Roman myths anymore. In fact, I'm surprised Britons even recognize anything from the Bible. Only Slow Henry saw both the flying chariot and the movements of the moon and sun-like object that mirrored it. Only he saw the yellow orb actually slip behind the moon and become covered by it, invisible. Only he sat up and watched all night as it remained motionless in the sky, until dawn the next morning. Then, he says, the sun-like object came back and replaced it, covering the moon with itself, while the thing Henry took to be the real sun rose in the east as expected. I told you that a sleepy, comatose state came over the city's population from late Friday night until dawn Easter morning. This episode is now referred to by your prostitute news media with the cutesy nickname, the London Fog, to keep you from taking it seriously. Because of the fog, there are only a handful of witnesses who observed the various states of the moon over the weekend. There are quite a few people who say they saw the strange lights next to the moon at sunset on Friday night. But then, inexplicably, many of the people who had been watching this spectacular display in the sky decided to go to bed quite early. Those who had fallen into the trance of the fog then dragged themselves groggily through the next day and night, not recalling the events of Friday until those of Sunday morning shook them out of their stupor. Later, these people were kicking themselves for not looking up even once on Saturday. Those who were affected by the fog can't even remember what they spent their time doing that day. It was only from the vigilant few who not only remained watchful at the time but had the courage to testify in public afterwards that some of the sleepers have learned about what they missed. According to Slow Henry, the sun-like object remained at the sky's meridian, motionless, all day, while the real sun rose and set. Then, at nightfall, the bloody red moon with the 3 bright red spots came back, covering the sun-like object again. It just came over it, like a coin being turned over, he said. The moon was suddenly there at the top of the sky and remained motionless in place throughout the night. Then, early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, the moon started turning bright violet throughout. He didn't have proof, like I had seen, that it was acting as a filter for something inside that was putting out strong UV light. But he did instinctively compare the way it looked, the light that came from it, and the way it made things appear, so that the whole city looked like a discotheque, to the characteristics of a blacklight. Assholes on YouTube, trolling the video where Henry is interviewed, keep saying that the moon doesn't put out its own light. They don't know what the moon even is. Nobody does. Attempts to come up with scientific explanations for the things that people saw that night are extremely insulting. Several commentators have mentioned that none less than Sir William Herschel himself, discoverer of the planet Uranus, witnessed 3 glowing red spots on the moon on April 19, 1787. Around the same time, something described as an aurora borealis, in other words, a green light in the sky, was observed simultaneously by the people of Padua, Italy, quite far from where such phenomena are usually observed, in the Arctic Circle. Shortly afterwards, there was a huge spike in the number of sunspots recorded. It seems to me that Herschel witnessed something similar to what we in the City of London saw on Easter weekend 2018. Nonetheless, the same lame explanation of lunar outgassing has been given for both events by the incredulous scientific community. As usual, they have no respect for the intelligence of the observer when it comes to things they cannot explain. Most unexplainable of all, from the morning of Easter 2018, was the hole that opened up in the sky later that morning, just before dawn. As Slow Henry describes it, sun-like object at the zenith of the firmament disappeared through a circular window that opened up behind it, revealing an indigo field studded with stars, a bizarre sight in full daylight. Then the entire window became a solid bright green color, which shined down on everything below. At that exact moment, the first earthquake took place. The hole stayed open, and the green light continued to shine down for another 20 minutes. Illuminating things that witnesses wish they had never seen. It stayed open even as the sun began to rise in the east, blurring out the ghastly vision somewhat. Then the window turned indigo and star-studded once again, and a few minutes later a black sphere fell out of it, into the Thames. This is according to both Slow Henry and also Ficus, a YouTube user who filmed much of Sunday morning's events from the viewing platform at an office building known as The Shard. The video confirms a lot of what both men described, although much of it is also open to interpretation. Slow Henry didn't see the rest because he was on his knees praying, and when he got up again, after he was all over, he couldn't see anything anymore. The hyper-Uranian light had blinded him. Unlike me in Rosenberg's basement, Slow Henry didn't have a magical diamond keystone plugging up the hole in the sky, protecting him from the hyper-Uranian rays, whilst refracting the light and allowing him to see by them. So the horrible sights they showed him were the last things he ever got to see. But this is, in fact, what the Masonic keystone represents. It is a stone that does just this, acting simultaneously as a deck prism and as a protective light filter. It is because it provides protection that it was represented as a buckler or a shield in Rothschild heraldry. This is why it's so often represented on Masonic tracing boards in the arch of the sky, between the sun and the moon, forming a third and higher source of light. It's a window that plugs up the hole, allowing the transcosmic God to see you, and perhaps for you to see him as well. This is why the Masons also represent the same concept with an eye in a triangle, sun-like rays often streaming out of it, like a prism refracting light. Also used interchangeably with these symbols, or in combination with them, is the letter G, the seventh letter of the alphabet, which I believe stands for the gamma ray, as I mentioned before. These Masonic images amply demonstrate that my interpretation is correct. The two aftershocks that followed the first earthquake, as Ficus documented, each coincided with the events in the sky that took place next. The first was accompanied by another shock wave and sonic boom, similar to that of Friday night at sundown, but louder. This happened right after two naked children riding a flying white horse through the air. The second aftershock occurred at the same time as the solar polarity flip and the formation of the sinkhole. As the Ficus video shows, this coincided with the re-emergence of the sun-like object from the portal, followed by an egg-white globe of equal size that came out right behind it. This is what formed the triangle of circles, yellow, white, and star-flecked indigo, that I saw in the sky when the ceiling collapsed, just before I blacked out. As I witnessed myself, all three circles then turned yellow for a few moments. Then they sort of rolled together into one yellow orb, which immediately started bleeding into the Thames. A few seconds later, the yellow orb itself fell straight down into the river, revealing the indigo star-flecked circle just behind it. Scariest of all was what happened right afterwards, when that indigo circle, which had previously seemed to be an open window, a portal, then rolled up to the top like an eyelid, revealing a gigantic eye behind it. This eye then eerily blinked twice before it closed for good an instant later. I think that the yellow orb bled and descended when the body of Baron Carrickfergus finally died. As I shall explain shortly, I have surmised that his body was devoured by the Trinacria as they both floated away down the Thames a few minutes after the sinkhole formed. But by then the Trinacria had already consumed another creature and taken on another transformation, which I will soon describe. It is my belief that the Trinacria was possessed by the spirit of Kronos/Saturn. Plutarch wrote that the former king of the Golden Age was buried somewhere beneath the British Isles, in a death-like sleep in a tomb that is also his prison. He was kept alive by birds, who brought his ambrosia to eat as he slept, and with his dreams he communicated to his followers on the surface of the earth. I think Rosenberg was one such follower, and that those ravens in the Tower of London were the ones feeding Kronos, somehow. When Rosenberg had them killed, it released his spirit into the body of a waiting golem that Rosenberg had prepared. Plutarch wrote that the tomb of Kronos is guarded by someone named Briareus. This, we know from other sources, is the name of one of the Titans selected to serve as a guard all the others imprisoned in Tartarus. So Plutarch was saying that somewhere beneath the British Isles is the location of Hell, which is also the womb of the Earth goddess, that Kronos had to chop his way out of, so that he and his siblings could be born. I recently discovered while writing down these memories that Man Ray, The surrealist artist whose cover illustration for Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom was reproduced for Rosenberg's Invocation of Venus in the Mithraeum, was once commissioned to make a poster for the London Underground, the subway system, in which he made the system's logo appear to resemble the planet Saturn. I wonder if he was aware of the myth of Kronos being buried underneath Britain, or if one of the people in charge of hiring him suggested it. In my mind, the symbolism of both man-ray pieces can be connected. The 120 Days illustration was an inverted Christian cross superimposed over the buttocks of a young man. Saturn is specifically associated with sodomy, as the root words connected to his name attest. Satu means sowing, referring to planting seeds in the earth, just as Saturn's title Satyr means sower. His epithet sterculeus comes from stercus, meaning dung. The English word sod, referring to earth covered with grass, may come from this connection in Latin between feces and agricultural fertilizer. It's also probably no coincidence that in Britain, the word sod is a slang term for sodomite, or that the inhabitants of Sodom were known to be haughty because of their vast mineral wealth, which the subterranean Saturn, imprisoned in Tartarus, was thought to be the ruler of. Vulgar words for feces are often used colloquially to refer to gold, money, or treasure in cultures around the world, probably because of the traditional connection between these things and the underworld. The Etruscans called Saturn Satre and said that he hurls his lightning from his abode deep in the earth. It seems pretty clear to me that the entrance to the infernal prison of Kronos was right there at Bucklersbury. But I don't think Kronos is there anymore. I think he safely floated away down the Thames, contained in the diamond inside of the Trinacria. The creature was actually spotted by witnesses who were standing on the waterfront next to the Traitor's Gate of the Tower of London. They were there to participate in a recreation of a historic April Fool's joke, the washing of the lions. In centuries past, the joke was simply to invite people to attend this oddly titled annual event at the Tower of London. The victim would then arrive at the tower and find nothing going on. So when something called the Washing of the Lions was announced in the Festivals and Events section of the Sunday Telegraph on Palm Sunday, slated to take place at dawn on Easter morning at the Tower of London, everyone knew it was going to be a joke. Most of those who were standing there that day were aware of the history of the prank and were waiting to see how it would be improved upon from previous performances. Each one of them, when interviewed individually, reported being confused about the location of the sun that morning while traveling to the event, but nobody spent much time analyzing it. Therefore, when these people felt the earthquake and finally looked up to see the amazing sights in the sky, they at first tried to convince each other that it was somehow part of the show. "I thought they were using holographic technology and sound effects," said one person to reporters. "You'd never think there's going to be an earthquake in London?" Therefore, when guards from the tower, dressed in full regalia, came out with a lion on a leash, everyone present felt even more certain that they were merely watching an elaborate April Fool's hoax. I am surprised that the event was still scheduled to proceed, considering what had already happened to the ravens of the tower. But that had already been completely covered up, as it continues to be by the government. Then the animal did something that could only, under these precise circumstances, be taken by the audience as part of the show. It hissed, growled, and lurched out of its handler's grasp. Then it dove headfirst into the water like it was completely mad. But it wasn't. It was defending itself against something that it felt threatened by. Those watching said they saw the lion attack a creature with 3 human legs and a demonic glowing red face that was floating in the water. As soon as the lion and the monster made contact with each other, the front end of the lion began to dissolve into the body of the hellish beast, until it was completely gone. Then, observers say, they noticed that the creature had taken on some of the features of the lion's face, including its large teeth, as well as its mane. Next, floating down the river from behind the creature came another horrific sight, a naked white male, seemingly deceased. As soon as the monster saw it, he lurched forward and devoured it. It was then that the bleeding son fell into the river, right before the eyes of the people watching the monster's attack. After it had finished devouring the guts, the monster snarled at the people watching him from the shore and swam away. Officials admit that this was the body of Baron Carrickfergus, though they deny he was attacked by anything other than a lion. However, they don't even attempt to explain why a lion would jump into a river to attack a person who was reportedly either already dead or almost dead. I know that the Tranacria made it all the way out to the Thames estuary, where the river empties out into the North Sea. There, witnesses spotted a, quote, ruby-colored crystal rise out of water and into the sky, where it took the form of a red star with 7 rays. From the tips of these rays then appeared 7 stars of different colors. All of these objects seemed to come from the center of the ruby mother star except for one, which shined with a light that appeared to be constantly changing color. This one seemed to have come from the south, as if attracted to the end of one of the rays of light by an unseen force. Once assembled, the entire arrangement of lights began spinning counterclockwise to the cheers of the crowds assembled on the shore. Then, all of the other stars lowered themselves beneath the one in the center. After that, the red star and its entourage shot off further out to sea, then took a turn southwest. They floated past the white cliffs of Dover, the last place they were seen. It wasn't until after this adventure was over that I learned about William Blake's mystical prophetic poetry on the topic of London. To him, writing during the Industrial Revolution, London was a sort of microcosm of the universe, and analogous or even truly identical to Jerusalem, which he likewise interpreted as a transcendental non-local place. At the same time, it still was his own contemporary London, possessing all the same monuments and street names. His own pet name for this primordial London-Jerusalem city was Golgonooza, a word unique to his vocabulary. William Blake saw this city as the first created space, out from which creation radiated as it came into being at the beginning of time. This would make it analogous to the Even HaShatia, the foundation stone of creation in the real terrestrial Jerusalem that I mentioned earlier. This object is located in the Dome of the Rock, which the Knights Templar maintained as their official headquarters during their day. As I said, this stone was replicated for the altar of the St. Stephen Walbrook Church, which Rosenberg borrowed for use in his Mithraeum during his Sikh rituals. Even HaShatia, if a foundation stone was the point of origin for everything, then it follows that all the dimensions of space should be measured from there. Thus, it should be used in the same manner as the Roman Milarium stones, which is what many think was the purpose of the London stone. This would explain why Queen John D thought the artifact was magical, and moved his residence to Cannon Street to be near it. In William Blake's poems, London/Jerusalem/Golgonooza was not just a city, but also a living being. It was at once the female sex partner and the emanation of a more all-encompassing being called Albion, an ancient name applied to the British Isles. Blake's Albion has everything in common with Kronos, as even Wikipedia acknowledges. Perhaps the diamond we found within it is the actual foundation stone. Maybe it contained the damned and imprisoned soul of Albion/Kronos/Saturn. If so, I think he has been set free now, the consequences of which I cannot predict. It may be that the burden of holding up the worlds has now fallen on the shoulders of the ambitious Mr. Rosenberg. In that sense, we can say that he achieved a bit of the universal importance he strove for. Since the spectacular events of Easter morning, the people in the City of London have only seen one sun in the sky and one moon at night, just like everyone else in the world. The stars have returned to normal as well, or at least that's how people perceive it. I tend to think that a new normal has been established, and we simply don't remember that things used to be different. We are under the order of a new sun, but we don't realize it. We think it has always been this way. It's no shock to me that almost no one has suggested the signs in the heavens seen in the city foretold the birth of a Messiah. The rumor mill only manufactures paranoia and hate. Nobody ever tells you that anything good will happen, unless they're trying to sell you something. According to the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, the only thing unusual that happened in space that day was an inordinate amount of sunspot activity which hadn't been predicted. They admit that the sun's polarity flipped just before the earthquake in the sinkhole occurred. A few experts have been allowed to hint that there could be a connection between the two events, but always with the caveat that it was far too complex for anyone to ever understand, and therefore not worth the effort. They also admit that the tides on the Thames Friday and Saturday night were a bit wobbly, but can't say why. The connection between the solar anomalies and the widespread sporadic interruption of electronic communications throughout the weekend has not been denied. Nor is it denied that this contributed to slowing the spread of information regarding the sudden shift that was occurring on the precious metal markets. As you all know, when France pulled out of the Eurozone, it caused a run on gold, starting late Friday night. That night at the party, Marcia Martina and her son Philip were quite satisfied with themselves. Of course, the Rothschilds had been among the world's largest gold holders for centuries, despite a misleading headline published in the Telegraph in 2004. Rothschild to pull out of gold market after 200 years. More recently, they had been calling in huge quantities and tightening their purses. In the previous 2 months, the price of gold had gone up considerably because of this hoarding. It was all part of tightening the screws on the central banks, particularly in the West, as Ms. Martina had explained to us. This was payback, punishment, and reining in after decades of poor fiscal governance. Because of this, it had become increasingly difficult for governments to sell bonds. It was also difficult to obtain gold as a backup reserve. The states of the Western world were inarguably at the mercy of the moneylenders, and this one family in particular. This was because they controlled such a large share of the market, and they had decided to collude to bring about this crisis. The night of the crash, we all assumed that a major shift in wealth had happened to dramatically concentrate it even more amongst the so-called 1%. Rosenberg's own newspaper ran with the headline, "Gold sky high, silver to the moon." But nobody knew that Rosenberg's people had just suddenly dumped trillions of dollars worth of gold and silver on the market. As you know, gold went from being the 72nd most common element to the 65th, taking the place formerly held by silver. The simultaneous silver dump bumped that metal down to 50 on the list. It wasn't until Monday morning EST, however, that people took full account of this in the financial news media. The market was already presented with the difficulty that both the place where the gold prices were fixed each day, the London bullion market, and the place where the pound was issued, the Bank of England, had both fallen into the sinkhole. Aggravating the delay of the reaction was the fact that this specialty of journalism had already been crippled by the destruction of the main offices of both Rosenberg Network and the Financial Times. Then there was the issue of the Niptron terminal hacks involving the so-called Caput 58 virus, which caused every single one of the machines to freeze up on the traders at 10:30 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Simply put, a pop-up window opened on their screens demanding the solution to a riddle involving computer-generated three-dimensional image of a diamond shape with 58 facets. By inference, a head with 58 faces. Encoded with an 8-character set of symbols referred to by the virus program as the operants, the 7 planetary sigils, plus John Dee's monad symbol. Infected terminals were also presented with what purported to be a key, a 5x5 Latin square image cipher. By the time security experts figured out a way around the challenge, it was too late to save anybody's bets. It was only after reading about the details of the virus that I figured out the meaning of the term proteans that had been used on the bottle with the liquor amnii that saved my feet, and anagrams of operants. It is a reference to the Ogdoad of 8 archons. These are the 7 planets, plus a transcended twin of Mercury, who is also the goddess Sophia Achamoth, Metis, or Mete, the Great Mother, Dear Prudence. They are represented by the 8 characters used in the Sator square, with 3 different magnitudes of use, representing 3 different levels of divine power. T, R, E, O, and A are used 4 times each, representing the 5 wandering planets. P and S are only used 2 times each. They represent the higher powers of the sun and moon. N is the letter in the center of the square, and it is only used once. It represents a god power transcending the others, but one which is mutable and open to interpretation, like Proteus of Greek mythology, and like Quicksilver, corresponding to the philosopher's Mercury, the universal solvent. By dissolving, separating, and recoagulating the essences of the gods themselves, any imaginable change is possible, including chemical changes otherwise not allowed. When it was discovered that the total global quantity of gold had suddenly increased drastically over the weekend, there were many theories introduced by the experts on the news. First, of course, was to suspect counterfeiting, and so all the vaults forced to say their gold holdings, to the embarrassment of all the companies involved. As we all saw, None of them had the physical reserves they had claimed prior to the dump. All of them had been committing fraud, as had all of the world's governments, with the full knowledge and collusion of all of the world's banks. This, analysts say, is what really destroyed Barclays Bank when its stock price evaporated on April 2nd. We all remember Rosenberg's crazy rant that Black Friday evening during an interview on his own TV network, Skyped live from his office right there at Rosenberg Plaza. I didn't get to see it at the time, as I was walking with Chesterfield to New Court to meet Rosenberg and his friends for dinner. But of course I saw the highlights, endlessly replayed on the news for weeks. There, to an interviewer who was utterly confused, he declared that the, quote, the so-called noble metals of the old plutocracy would soon be dethroned like the noble families of old Europe had been dethroned by money. He then announced his vision for a new system of wealth and power distribution based on the value of the human body, its parts, the fluids it produces, and its perceived value, to which he added finger quotes, as an object of affection. It was so bizarre, commentators on his own network said that they actually thought he was drunk. In a way, they were right. He was drunk on the blood and suffering of innocence. The conspiracy crowd claimed the sinkholes were the result of a, quote, false flag attack, a Jewish plot to consolidate their wealth. Furthermore, they said, the earthquakes, sinkholes, solar activity, and orbs in the sky were all caused by weather modification technology they purported distracting investors from the coming changes in the gold and silver markets. Why? Because when the price of gold, the value of paper, and credibility of credit collapsed simultaneously overnight, the jig was up. Time to cover your tracks and run away to your private islands, right? But the source of this crowd's real complaint had also been eliminated. The anti-Zionist movement against Jewish banksters lost its raison d'être because, as it turns out, nobody really cares about Israel one way or the other, except for a few freaks, and most cannot tell a Jew apart from a Gentile unless they are told what's what. The thing that really bothered these people the most was the vast amount of money, gold, and property, a large portion of the earth's entire treasure, locked up in the hands of one family, who had then successfully managed to deflect attention away from themselves. Many historians had falsely claimed that the Rothschilds had waned in wealth and influence, but the exact opposite is true. Those who knew this, or felt that they knew it, had been frothing at the mouth for decades, trying to wake up the sheeple to the truth. Now, although this truth had been covered up even more completely with the collapse of New Court into the Bucklersbury sinkhole, the problem was gone as well. The Rothschild fortune has essentially been obliterated. The membership of their incestuous clan has been decimated, in the classical sense of the word, 1 out of 10 gone, not 9, as the common modern misnomer implies. Moreover, it was the older, more corrupt 10% that was killed, as many of the tribe elders were asleep in the new court building at the time of the collapse, having gathered there Friday night for a week-long Passover celebration. But that very night, they lost the value of all their money, though at the time they thought they had just made a killing. The properties they owned lost value as well, and, of course, their most important piece of real estate, their London headquarters, which fell down into its proper final resting place in the depths of hell. They even lost their pet project, the Bank of England. For it's not just the building that has disappeared, but the whole institution as well. At the present writing, it looks like it will soon be shut down in favor of the new solutions currently being proposed in the House of Commons. It's a humiliating defeat for a once all-powerful dynasty. Those Rothschilds who are left will probably change their names again within a generation, and be entirely forgotten by their descendants. On a related note, it is interesting to consider that the Superman character is broadly considered by media experts to be a representation of Jewish identity. As I learned in college from a Jewish film history professor who lived in New York City, the Superman character was literally created to represent Jewish immigrants from Europe who were hiding in plain sight in the entertainment industry by using westernized names, just like Superman hides behind the persona of Clark Kent. Now here's another amazing coincidence to keep in mind. It is known that the character of Lois Lane, Clark Kent's girlfriend, is based on a girl that Superman's creator Jerry Siegel had a crush on in high school in Cleveland. Her name was Lois Rothschild. None of the articles written on this subject say she's related to the banking family. But even if this is just a coincidence, I sense that it points to something significant, as coincidences often do. As for the future of the hyperuranium, the new element that was discovered at the bottom of the sinkhole, along with considerable amounts of platinum, it could be the foundation stone of a new golden age. I think it was probably created naturally somehow when the sinkhole formed, transmuted from the gold, silver, and other precious metals and gems that were present in the underground vaults of the Bank of England. But I fear that it will be monopolized and controlled like gold has been. I also think it's very likely that new war technologies will result from the research and development with it that is to come. In other words, I think it will only serve to further enslave us. The presence of a lump of it in my pocket, along with a note from Leopold, discovered when I got to the hospital, just after he disappeared, is another miracle that I cannot explain. The note came with a phone number and instructed me to contact Harut al-Hazrat, a broker who, it said, could help me sell the piece of metal. I don't know if it was a blessing or a curse. On the one hand, the sale did bring a tidy sum, which has eliminated my financial problems for the time being. On the other hand, just before I gave it over to the broker, I did an experiment with it, in which I rubbed it across the skin between my eyes. Ever since, my clairvoyant powers have been dramatically increased, which is sometimes a problem now. Some things you just don't want to see. It is mind-bending to try to grasp the reflexive, sympathetic relationships that must exist between the orders of the universe, which make it possible for an action performed on the body of a divine child, anal penetration, to rip holes in both the earth and the sky. But then again, what made it possible for such a divine child to be bred using the perverse means that I have described? Is the human conscience ready to accept the realities that this is based on? You now know the truth about what happened to change the head of state in the UK, who is said to have died in Westminster at the exact moment that the sinkhole formed in the city. You also now know what happened to the other two waiting in line. They didn't just die in a sinkhole while visiting a friend during an experiment gone awry, as your media told you. I have given you the real reason why the British people now have a screwball for a regent and a toddler waiting for the throne. But you should take it as a positive sign that the screwball in question was not present at the ceremony that took the lives of the other three. There must be a reason why he wasn't invited. I am not saying you should trust him. I am only saying it's a possible sign of hope for the future. I took quite seriously the rumor I read on 4chan about him, stating that he personally discovered a white horse grazing on the lawn of Kensington Palace, along with two naked children playing nearby in the grass. Word on the street is that they have been secretly adopted into the royal household. It is a relief that certain people lost power and were denied their ambitions to greater power that weekend. But the ruling class still has the same perverse proclivities as always. They are still using the same tactics of violence and blackmail to maintain that power. You see that the exposure of the Lord Mayor's child abuse, caught on video, led to no further investigation of organized pedophilia among the elite. You see that the 729 murdered children of the year-long rite, not counting Philippine I presume, were never identified, and nobody was ever arrested for that. However, I think it's possible that forces were unleashed during this ritual, both for good and for evil, which will play an important role in events to come, possibly deciding whether or not this state of affairs shall continue. We shall see what comes of it. For a sign of prognosis, I will continue to watch the skies and the headlines, and wait. Here ends the work of the sun. Long live Sol Novus. Before the consummation of the age, the whole place will shake with great thundering. Then the sun will become dark, and the moon will cause its light to cease. The stars of the sky will cancel their circuits, and a great clap of thunder will come out of a great force that is above all the forces of chaos, where the firmament of the woman is situated. Then she will pursue the gods of chaos, whom she created, along with the prime parent. She will cast them down into the abyss. They will be obliterated because of their wickedness, for they will come to be like volcanoes and consume one another until they perish at the hand of the prime parent. When he has destroyed them, he will turn against himself and destroy himself until he ceases to exist. And their heavens will fall one upon the next, and their forces will be consumed by fire. Their eternal realms too will be overturned, and his heaven will fall and break in two, fall into the abyss, and the abyss will be overturned. On the Origin of the World, translated by Hans Gebhard Bethge and Bentley Leighton.